Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Godlike Naruto secret ANBU commander. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Paracuties and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. A boy no older than 12 burst through the trees at an amazing speed, racing back to the ANBU headquarters to report, and quickly get to school. It was around 2 a.m., but he'd have to get at least a bit of sleep before school started at 7. Silently, he pressed his hand to the seal, pushed in a bit of his chakra, and when it was recognized, watched the door silently swing open to let him in. The ANBU raced inside, his black clothes allowing him to become almost invisible in the shadowed hallways except for the telltale glint of his katana strapped perpendicularly to the standard wakizashi on his back, the hilt lifted just a centimeter because of his hurry. His katana was 2 feet long and specifically created for him after he had shown a tendency for kenjutsu as well, having already specialized in ninjutsu and taijutsu. ANBU needed their own specific weapons in order to complete their A-ranked or S-ranked or possibly even higher-ranking mission as easily as possible, and the boy was no different. He knocked quietly, handed in his report, and the body of the enemy he had recently assassinated sealed inside a scroll to the Hokage, was dismissed, and proceeded to hurry back to his small apartment. The few hours of sleep he caught passed quickly, and suddenly it was 6:45 a.m. before he could even blink. Shoot! He cursed a few more choice words, some a variation of the first word and others not, struggling to pull on the orange jumpsuit over his ANBU outfit he had fallen asleep in. After going through a quick morning routine, one which sadly did not consist of a shower, the boy checked his tattoo was covered before grabbing a bowl of ramen from Ichiraku's and hurrying to school. He ate it along the way, moving along slowly, trying to enjoy the new beef miso soup, sprinkled with more onions and some other unidentifiable, at least to him, vegetable. But it was good, so he just slurped it down with the rest. At least it didn't smell like any known poisonous plant. Once at school, he hurried into his classroom, almost 20 minutes late, called out in, "Irika-sensei, I'm here," before quickly claiming his seat in the back row. The class snickered, except for some who were too lazy to and some who were too cool to. Yes, he could have set an internal alarm clock to get up on time, and yes, he could have gobbled up his meal in 5 minutes. There were times on ANBU missions he had to eat in less time than even that, but he didn't want to. Besides, Irika-sensei was pretty lenient with him. "Naruto, stay after school again, today. When will you ever learn your lesson? Or maybe not so lenient this time." "Yes, Irika-sensei," he sighed. Today was a history lesson, and since he already knew all the academy would teach and more, there was no need to pay attention. Well, really, there was no need to pay attention to anything at any time at all, since anything they taught, he had already learned in ANBU. But he liked to give respect to the brown-haired chunin, who cared for him like an older brother or even a father. It felt nice to be cared for in that way. Irika-sensei started explaining the progression of the daimyo of Konoha over the years, until to the current daimyo, who was doing something or other for Konohagakure, Leaf Village. Naruto did try to pay attention really, but found his eyes drawn to his charge. The mission assigned to him years ago. He hadn't been a fully fledged ANBU then, as no 6-year-old could ever, no matter how much of a prodigy or hard worker or both, be able to get that far. But as he continued through the academy, maintaining a cheerful, dumb cover, he had advanced to be captain of a team, better than anyone could be at killing. It was a sad thought. He laughed. "Uzumaki, would you like to explain what you're finding so funny about the 4th Hokage, the Yondaime?" So they had moved from daimyos to Hokages. Well, he cleared his throat. "Well, I just thought, what if the 4th Hokage wasn't actually that nice looking? And he was just a smelly, old man underneath the henge like the old man? Heh." Pretending he thought that of his own father felt strange. Irika knew, with the old man comment, he was referring to their current Hokage, the Sandaime. "Don't be so rude." Irika chucked a chalkboard eraser at Naruto for good measure. Naruto ducked. Another hour added to the hour after school, he groaned internally. He wouldn't be able to get dinner then, because he'd have to report to the ANBU headquarters by 5:30 p.m. School ended at 3:30 p.m. He cringed. He'd definitely be late. Come on, do you want me to add on more time?" Naruto gulped. He shook his head, and the rest of the day passed by uneventfully. After staying for the allotted time and receiving a good OL lecture from Irika-sensei, the blonde raced out, shedding his orange suit and tossing it in his apartment before grabbing his fox mask and running at full speed towards headquarters. Him, being the container for the demon fox, Kyubi no Kitsune, was called Kitsune, or Fox, as his code name. His moniker, known throughout the village as one of the most feared shinobi, was the Red Slash. Yes, how ironic. Again, considering the fact that he contained a demon, which tended to be imagined as a red made of lava, evil being, and his chakra affinity was wind, wine slashed at you, right? Okay, so maybe that was pushing it. In all reality, the moniker meant if you saw the Red Slash as your enemy, you were as good as dead. The last thing you'd see would be a red slash. That didn't make sense. How would his moniker have come about if all his opponents were dead, except for a certain few? But anyway, he arrived 10 minutes late. With a backpack containing all the scrolls, he always sealed everything and slung over his shoulder. At least he wasn't as late as Hataki Kakashi, one of his team members that he was the leader of, was. Kakashi had been leading a life of depression, self-wrecking, and guilt for as long as he could remember. But when he had befriended him when he was 7, the ANBU had recovered a little, and had personally requested to be on his team after quitting the role of an ANBU team captain when Naruto, or Kitsune, was skilled enough to lead an entire team of ANBU. Fortunately, nobody in ANBU knew who Kitsune was except for the ANBU commander. He had been the one to recruit him and help him, but that was a different story for another time. Kitsune, you're late. The woman who always handed out the missions frowned at him, although she couldn't see the young ANBU member's face. He bowed slightly. I am sorry, Amaya-san. I will be more punctual next time. Of course you will. I won't report you, he sighed in relief. That would save him from a lot of trouble from explaining why he had misbehaved in class to the point of earning detention. Ridiculous for a skilled, professional ANBU member. At that time, Kakashi chose to arrive, his shock of silver, gravity-defying hair brushing the top of the doorframe as he entered. You're late, Kakashi-san, Naruto told him, although it was kind of pointless. Only a little, senpai, Kakashi murmured, seeming to smile. Amaya rolled her eyes. Here, Kitsune, your mission will last 3 days, at the most. You need to capture maybe 4 of 12 Kirin attacking one of Fire Country's villages. They're Jounin, or Haichunin. I'm sure you all can handle it. They nodded, and with just a faint breeze, were gone, already heading towards the city indicated in their mission details. Inu, get 1, I'll get 5. They seem to be combining their chakra affinities, although I know one of them is wind. Got it. Watch it, Nico. Kitsune jumped forward and slashed at a man behind the ANBU member Nico, as she fought 3 opponents at once. She turned, her porcelain mask portraying the slight resemblance of a cat. His slash decapitated the man, and the grown shinobi howled, clutching his bleeding chest, large amounts of blood spilling out every frantic beat his heart made. Naruto slammed the handle of his wakizashi onto the enemy's head, hard, then healed a bit of the man's injury, his hands glowing green before hauling him to Hikigeru, the woman with the toad-like mask in charge of keeping their prisoners imprisoned and not too damaged. Inu was still facing down 1 and 5, although judging by the red liquid seeping out of one's clothing and the red spatters in Inu's silver hair, he had gotten a good hit on at least one of his opponents. Kitsune jumped in, and used the wind against the man with wind affinity, as he had better control. People who used their chakra affinity often were obviously more talented, but they weren't ANBU for nothing. Kitsune was even better than them at using his wind-type ninjutsu in battles. His katana came in contact with the wind 5 was using to counter him, but he smirked and cut through that too, after wrapping the blade in wind. The men's screams were cut short as Kitsune hit them as well over the head. He stood up, surveying the damage. Good job, team, not too much damage to the surroundings and too little evidence for anybody to assume a battle took place. Although Nico, seriously, remember to watch your back. Haven't I told you that already? Cat shrugged sheepishly. Well, Kitsune-senpai, I know you'll always catch them before they get to me. That's no excuse. And besides, it's not a guarantee. Cat bowed slightly. I'm sorry. I'll train that aspect more often. Kitsune nodded. Then, he turned to Hikigeru, silently asking her if their prisoners were stabilized enough so that they wouldn't die on the way back. After all, their mission was to capture, not kill. She nodded, and they bent down next to the 4 of them, the other 8 destroyed with quick-fire jutsus, placed in a single neat row. Nico, Bor, Inu, and Hikigeru all reached into the unconscious men's pouches, but Bor suddenly halted. Stop! They have a sensor. Too late. Blindingly bright flashes of light immediately exploded in front of them, stinging their eyes and blowing up all their unconscious enemies, but unfortunately also extending the damage to them as well. They had all sensed it. Instinct's warning of an unknown danger seconds before the explosion had thrown them like rag dolls and propelled them into the branches of trees, sharp pieces of metal also exploding outward and embedding themselves into the ANBU's skin. The 2 women, Nico and Hikigeru, went immediately unconscious as they hit their heads on the trees, unable to react quickly enough. Along with Boar, that bomb had to have been blown out with the force of at least 200 miles per hour, and only Inu and Kitsune had been lucky enough to have been thrown higher in the air and have those few extra precious seconds to catch themselves. They plunged into the branches of the surrounding trees, but at least on their feet, and hurried themselves to the terrible scene. Bits of human bodies were scattered everywhere, charred pieces lying around and the air immediately stinking of burning human flesh. That was not the horrifying part, though. It was normal enough. No, it was their teammates that caused them to widen their eyes and rush forward, blindly feeling for a heartbeat. Kitsune pressed on Nico's neck gently, his 2 fingers leaving a trail of someone's blood on her neck, straining to feel for even a slight pulse, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding when it was found. It was irregular though, so they had to be careful. Inu was relieved when he found it on Hikigaru and Boar too, although theirs were stronger than Nico's. Nico had always been a little too reckless. He turned to his unit commander, the boy's black hair stained with rusty blood and clear gray eyes squeezed tight. It wasn't right for a child to have to do this, and commit these heinous acts of silent killers, something grown men often broke down over, but Kitsune refused to listen. No matter how much he tried to convince the young ANBU to quit, he stubbornly refused to stop doing his duty, and said that it was for the better. He shook himself from his musings, carefully slinging 2 of his unconscious teammates both over his back, taking care not to jostle their wounds or worsen any of them, and adjusted them until they were both kind of half hanging on, half hanging off, side by side on his back. At least the 2 were both pretty lean people. Kitsune stood too, doing the same, minus 1 teammate slumped on his small back, and they moved quickly and evenly, the older ANBU stumbling every now and then, his wounds not healing as fast as the boys'. But he had endured worse, so he would be fine. They landed in a clearing, where Kitsune stopped, and said, "Come on, Inu, hand me Boar. You're killing yourself. You're also exhausted." His voice cut off as he fell over, too much blood loss having caused him to faint. They had not had enough supplies to bandage Kakashi's wounds too, but he had shrugged it off, saying he was fine and that his wounds would not slow them down. What a liar. Kitsune shook his head, and focused what little chakra he hadn't used up to speed up his healing and heal up his would have been lethal wounds, then pressed scarred, rough hands on Kakashi's leg and back, applying green chakra on the worst wounds. When he was finished, the small ANBU pondered how he'd transport them, knowing he couldn't seal them into his scrolls he had made to be able to seal in human beings, or other living things, as it would cause a little strain on their bodies. He really didn't think they could handle any more. But he could use the wind. Kitsune manipulated the wind to carry the 3, maneuvered them behind him so that they would always follow his path and not collide with any branches or other objects before taking off again, letting the wind take care of them. 7 hours passed, with multiple breaks inserted here and there when he felt he was going to faint. It had taken them 5 hours to get from Leaf Village to their destination, but he knew they still had about a quarter of the way to go. Boar had woken up, but then fallen asleep after Naruto had forced some water down his throat. The women hadn't, and Kakashi hadn't either. They were still in danger, and Kitsune couldn't stop now. His chakra had replenished a tiny bit, so he picked them up again, and sped off. The 2 guards rushed over to the 5 of them, taking 2 people at a time off of the wind. Naruto dropped to the ground, exhausted, unable to maintain his henge any longer. Of course he hadn't kept it up while carrying his team through the forest. That would have been stupid, but he couldn't let the guards know he was Uzumaki Naruto, the stupid little boy still enrolled in the academy. They would blabber it away to anyone and everyone, and his long-standing mission would end as a failure. No, fortunately, during that small lapse, they had been tending to the other shinobi's wounds, and only afterwards, 5 minutes later, had glanced over to the blonde-turned-back-to-black-haired boy, eyes still tight with worry. They were relieved to see him stand up and walk over as if he was not tired at all, and when the Red Slash instructed them to bring his soldiers to the hospital, they complied immediately. That left Naruto standing at the gates alone, and he sat down at one of the posts, keeping a lazy eye out for any intruders. After all, it couldn't do to have anyone infiltrate the village, no matter how little time it took for the original guards to get back, and rested, waiting. Kamizuki Izumo and Higane Kotetsu came back 8 minutes later, only to see the small boy still standing, or in his case, sitting, guard, waiting for their return. He sensed the 2 beings, and turned around, gave a lazy wave and smiled, although they couldn't see that behind his black mask wrapped around his nose and mouth, and walked back to his apartment. His henge disappeared as he rounded the corner, and he walked back home, his blue eyes drooping as he stumbled into bed. He didn't even bother to check for the usual drunks that like to beat up the helpless little Naruto. Kitsun's internal alarm clock jerked him awake, and he realized he had fallen asleep in his ANBU gear. Again, he stripped off his bloody and ripped clothing, took a quick shower, and put on another pair of his ANBU clothing, taking a look at the clock, which read 4:23 a.m. Wait, crap, last night he forgotten to report. Shaking his head at his own stupidity, he pulled on his black cloth mask, grabbed his broken ANBU mask, and shined to the Hokage's office, intent on delivering his report he had written on the way there. It was a sloppy, messy report, but it was there, and he placed it on his commander's desk, waiting to be allowed to explain a couple of things. His commander read through the illegible handwriting, before looking at the ANBU and nodding, a signal for him to speak. I'm sorry. Our mission failed. We were careless to underestimate them, or at least their equipment, and reached into their pouches without thinking to check for any dangers. Every single one of their pouches, or at least the ones we reached into, reacted to the foreign chakra and immediately sent a signal to their special bombs that would blow shrapnel everywhere, along with sending anything nearby into speeds of at least 200 miles per hour. I presume that they had already planned to die instead of reveal what they were doing in the case that they were captured, and we were unable to retrieve their bodies, while also sustaining injuries to ourselves. His commander nodded, crumpling up the report and tossing it into the waste basket at the far end of the room. It landed directly into the center of it. Your report is junk, Kitsun. I couldn't read a single thing. But thank you for remembering to give a verbal report, at least, and I will give your team 2 weeks off to heal. Your academy teacher has already been notified you will be gone for another day, today. But if you're up for it, you can still go. Kitsun nodded. Yes, I will go today, and take care of Mizuki before he goes and causes trouble. I have already found his notes inside the briefcase he carries around everywhere he goes, where he planned out what he would have been doing on this self-employed mission. Lucky me, for him to do such a thing. I took them, and left a copy I forged in his briefcase, making sure he would not detect any remnants of my chakra on the paper. I made sure the lettering was the exact same. Kitsun handed the notes to his commander, and the Hokage briefly looked over them, eyes sharp. They needed the evidence for this mission to take place. They would be killing Mizuki tonight, after they forced him to confess. Hey, Iruka-sensei. What are we doing today? Naruto shouted, glancing around the room and noticing that he was actually early, considering only Sasuke and Shino were there with their teacher. Well, he hadn't been able to fall asleep after waking up at 4-something a.m., the near-deaths of his teammates still fresh in his mind. Naruto? Iruka looked tremendously surprised, and slightly relieved, because he had been wondering why Naruto was yet again told by the ANBU guarding him that he was sick. It had already been 2 days, and Naruto was just not one to get sick. Even during the winter when almost everyone was home with a fever, Naruto would sit in class smiling brightly, without even a slight sniffle. And he was an orphan, to put it bluntly. Parents wouldn't be there to take care of him. No one was there making sure he was sleeping and eating healthily. Yet he appeared fine anyway, every single day, so he knew something was wrong. Fortunately, today he had shown up again, looking perfectly fine as usual except for the fact that there were those telltale signs of tiredness. The shadows and bags under his eyes proved that, and his smile was just slightly off. And then Iruka shook his head. There was no way that Naruto would have to stay up so late to get that tired. He must have been looking too hard and trying to dig up clues so hard he was imagining things. He looked up again from his paperwork to see Naruto bothering Sasuke, who sat there stonily, and only after being poked by the blonde multiple times did he try and take a swing at Naruto. Naruto flipped back sloppily, landing on the desk in front of Shino, who stood up and moved away from the oncoming fight. Boys, don't fight inside the room, we'll have plenty of that later, Iruka warned. Naruto laughed, settling into his seat in the back row. So they were sparring today, then, judging on what Iruka had said. Sasuke sat back down with a humph, his nose turning upward slightly. Naruto smirked. He'd have to provoke his charge a couple more times in order to gain some sort of relationship between them, even if it was just a mere rivalry. A rivalry was better than nothing, and rivalries tended to become slightly violent friendships, as long as they weren't rivalries between people of different countries. That was different. That was more on the serious side. More and more students filed in after that, the typical catfight breaking out between Sakura and Ino of who would sit next to Sasuke. Personally, he thought they were all just a bunch of pathetic excuses imagining the job of kunoichi filled with romance, and whatever they thought, until Iruka broke them up and had Shikamaru sit next to him. Heh. Shikamaru was a genius, really, based on what he had gleaned from his random bouts of sudden intelligence. But he was terribly lazy, too, and that was the only reason he was one of the students at the bottom of the class. Otherwise, he could probably top even Sasuke and Sakura in academics, while also having the ability to outmaneuver any of them out on the field. As the rest of the students filed in, Iruka-sensei announced they'd be participating in a class tournament today, after reviewing the basic katas, jutsu, and weapon usage techniques they could utilize during their fight. They stretched outside the green grass, leaving stains on their clothes, which resulted in most of the girls complaining about the terrible grass stains that would most likely not come out. The boys snickered at the girls' plight, which then resulted in the girls pounding them into the ground. Naruto snickered at that. While they had been stretching, Iruka-sensei had been going over the rules, and had stopped to separate the small arguments going on. He then continued with the rules that he always repeated before a tournament, and Naruto tuned him out, rather preferring to study his classmates. The girls, as usual, appeared nervous, especially Hyuga Hinata, although Sakura and Ino were arguing again about who would beat whom in a match against each other. He could see the tension lined in their shoulders, though, afraid they'd go up against a strong opponent. Iruka-sensei finished, and then called out who would go against whom, and first up just happened to be Sakura and Ino. They started clawing at each other after throwing a couple of weak punches and kicks, although at least the Yamanaka seemed to have a certain rhythm and looked to her stance as she stepped forward and swung her foot into the pinky's stomach. The girl collapsed, wheezing, and Iruka called the match for Ino as winner. The rest of the matches went fairly quickly, with me going against Shikamaru and him forfeiting the match after it extended longer than 5 minutes. Then, I was paired with Sasuke, and I rolled my eyes inwardly. I'd have to act more tired and slow, about 1/12 of my true skill, just so the rookie would beat the dead last, as expected. In the middle of the match, as I purposefully punched too slowly and too far off to the left to allow Sasuke grab my arm and fling me to the ground, I felt my ANBU tattoo start burning, grabbing my attention. My eyes widened, and I held both hands up, surrendering, then whined to Iruka that I needed to go to the bathroom real badly, and zipped off in that direction, before performing a quick shunshin to the ANBU headquarters out of sight of the class. In the blink of an eye, many ANBU appeared in front of the main entrance, and we filed in, waiting for the bad news from our ANBU commander. Although we technically directly served the Hokage, there was still an ANBU commander like there was a Jounin commander, to oversee us and make sure we were staying in line. The Hokage couldn't do everything. I stood off the side of the meeting room, afraid of something. I had a slight premonition something was about to happen. Something bad. My team was missing from the room, of course, and quite a couple of others too, seeing as they were the ones that patrolled or kept guard in the village, and couldn't suddenly leave it unpatrolled because of urgent news. The news would be relayed to them one way or another. Although, now that I noticed, it wasn't because of that. All of the ANBU currently present were ANBU captains. We waited silently, as we were all trained to obey our superiors without question, and our commander opened his mouth to begin. And suddenly fell over. Literally, just flopped over. And what? The couple people closest were immediately hoisting him up, checking for a pulse, if he was breathing, any signs of life. "He's dead," one announced gravely. The rest stood up in agreement, and we all stared at the body, completely lost as to what we were supposed to do. Why had we been summoned? Had he been somehow alerted to the fact that he was going to die in a few moments, and tried to call for our help? I stepped forward. First things first. We need to tell the Hokage. Kitsune? Why are you wearing that? I looked down. I was still wearing the ridiculous orange jumpsuit. Crap. At least I had remembered to put up my usual henge for my face and mask the fox's chakra, though. It had become so much of a regular routine that I didn't even notice doing the action anymore. Just a disguise. But that doesn't matter right now. Do you want me to seal the body into a scroll? They contemplated it for a little bit, but someone called out, no, because that could mess with the remnants of any chakra left on him, which could end up being some form of clue. I nodded. Well then, we should disguise him. I thought for a little bit. Then, I put a henge on him, his hair growing out longer and fading from brown to blonde, his 6-foot height turning into 5 feet 8 inches. His clothing flickered into civilian clothing, and a couple red slashes appeared on his chest to seem as if he'd died from wounds on his chest. No one would get suspicious, that way, if anyone saw the ANBU escorting a dead body to the Hokage's office. I examined it for flaws. None. The rest mostly nodded. A couple of them went with me for the visit to the Sandaime, and the people left over went to work looking around in his office. One of them, Hedgehog, carried the body, and the rest of us circled around him while moving as fast as we could along the top of the buildings. A couple other Jounin or Chunin had to skirt around us, staring at the body as we whipped by. I was glad I had put up the henge. We entered through the window, surprising the Hokage when he realized we were escorting a dead body. I dropped the henge, surprising the Hokage even further, and he stood up, running around the desk and crouching down to study our dead commander. He sighed, ran a hand over his usually jovial now turned weary face, and stood up again, looking at all of us and waiting for an explanation. I quickly summarized the whole event, and asked him in a blank voice, "What would you like us to do, Hokage-sama? Who was the one who first took control of the situation?" The question threw us off, and there was a pause as we digested the inquiry. I stepped forward. "I did." Nobody objected, and he raised his eyebrows. "Really?" We waited. "Well, then how would you like to be commander of the ANBU?" Dead silence reigned over the entire room. Trained as we were to respond immediately and effectively to any kind of situation whatsoever, we couldn't help but be stunned. Me especially, seeing as how I was the person in question. I, a little 12-year-old, although an immensely strong shinobi, being the commander of all the ANBU, wasn't that a little too much? No matter how much, as Naruto, I wanted to reach Hokage. I did, but I had to think logically. Almost none of the ANBU would accept this easily. The others, as I had predicted, did not seem very happy about this situation either, but the Hokage interrupted our confused or angry thoughts. "I cannot allow Danzo to try and take over all the ANBU and incorporate you all into his route. The ANBU are upgraded to the position of captain for a reason. 1. Being that they have the skill and other requirements for it, and 2. That I trust them completely. I trust every single one of you, as you must know, but if Danzo got to you, I couldn't allow the ANBU to be assigned so many missions and other important events with such freedom and independence of the Hokage. So I asked who had first gone forward and been the leader, and it ends up being Kitsune." We nodded. It made sense, yet I wasn't sure I would be able to gain all the respect of them, what with being a 12-year-old. The Sandaime cleared his throat. "I will inform the rest of the ANBU. We will all meet in the ANBU headquarters. This needs to be made clear that you, Kitsune, are the new commander. I'm assuming you accept the position." He turned away, dismissing us, and we returned to the headquarters, where the rest of the ANBU captains were still investigating the crime scene. I mulled over the new situation. I was ANBU commander. ANBU commander. That was the highest position, right behind Hokage. Would I be able to perform every single little duty with as much as precision as I did now? What if I didn't want the job? Yes, it was high-ranking, high-paying, and demanded much respect. It was also something assigned to me from the Hokage, and I was sworn to obey my Hokage without question. I would have to take the job, whether it was aligned with my personal preference, or not. When they noticed our return, they stopped, and a moment later all the ANBU in the village appeared. There were, total, about 15 ANBU captains, and most ANBU teams consisted of 5 people, meaning, there were 73 people in the room. One of the teams had been led by the previous commander, and since he was gone, that was one less. Another team had always had only 4 people. Of course, there were many more ANBU members than that, the groups dividing into sub-captains and sub-people or whatever, random ANBU grouping together at times to form random groups. They were out on the field currently, or if they weren't, were only random ANBU that were too low level to be of much importance, and if they obeyed their other superiors, then they'd have to obey the next to highest superior. Me. The couple newbies that happened to test high enough and gain a high enough rank whispered among each other until their captain snapped at them, and the room immediately quieted. The air weighed with something strange, and a heavy silence fell over the room. Once that happened, the Hokage appeared in a quiet swirl of leaves. "Everyone," he said gravely, "I have come to deliver bad news. Your ANBU commander was murdered." It seemed like he was not one to be direct. He held up a hand impatiently to keep us from exploding in shouts. "Your captains were called, apparently, and when they arrived, he suddenly fainted, or something of the sort, and passed away. So I, when I heard the news, appointed the new commander immediately, based on previous considerations as well as who had first taken care of the situation. I know you all will once say it is probably rash and try to tell me I haven't thought through it properly just yet, but until otherwise, you are to give him your utmost respect." The Hokage motioned at me, and I walked forward to the front of the room, feeling slightly nervous. I hadn't felt nervous at all in 3-4 years? Until now, of course. As everybody realized I, the 12-year-old Red Slash, was to be our commander, they seemed to stiffen. Glares were directed at me, and I could tell because we had taken off our masks in respect of the Sandaime. Mine was broken, of course, so I had not needed to take it off in the first place, but I needed another one, the 4th replacement in a month, but otherwise wait. Why was everybody looking at me so expectantly? Was I supposed to deliver a speech or something? I looked over to the Sandaime, but he was already gone. Whoa, had I seriously been that wrapped up in my own thoughts? I strolled over to the commander's desk. No, it was my desk now, and then turned to them. The couple of you involved in torture and investigations, I'm pretty sure you know what to do. Find what happened to our old commander. We can't have a murderer running loose around here. The ones on guard duty, I believe it is time to switch out. Report to Amaya-san for your missions, or if you would like to request leave for a period of time, please come to me afterwards and I will look through your files briefly and check that you are eligible. And of course, the rest of you, return to your patrols, or whatever else you were doing, and watch out for any suspicious character. Make sure the Sandaime isn't harmed. There was an odd, tight sensation within my chest, and a strange burning behind my eyes. I realized I cared for my commander. He had saved me, all those years back. True, it was probably more for his own benefits than caring for a poor orphan boy, but he had been, at the time, the only person to not see me as some demon or monster other than Gigi, the Hokage. Get him! Don't let him escape! The man I had tried to pickpocket hollered, anxiously waiting for the ANBU to capture the evil little demon. Me, however, I was starving and exhausted and shaking with thirst, so the only way to survive was to steal. Or scavenge in the trash, but I hated doing that. It made me feel lowered, feel like a disgusting little rat, pushed around by all the towering, looming humans. Pumping my legs as hard as I could, I started to become hopeful, knowing that my hideout was just a couple of yards away. I skidded around the corner, the rain causing me to slip and slide a bit before catching myself, heart pounding and breath coming out in gasps. And it just so happened that the ANBU commander was standing there, dark and imposing. Before I could even so much as blink, he had already roughly gripped my wrists and wrestled the stolen wallet away. I cried out, but I couldn't get it back now. The only way to get out of here was to run. I wrenched my wrists away by some miracle, removed the sewer top, the rough sides of the hole scratching my arms as I dropped down, splashing into the dirty water below. And then I rigged the trap, and ran. I shot down the dank tunnel, peering back behind my shoulder multiple times and imagining the ANBU catching up, ready with handcuffs. That was the only thing keeping me from stopping. By the time I reached the place only I visited, as far as I knew, I was exhausted, and hungrier than ever. Being a homeless orphan sucked, especially when that was all I had ever known since I had memory, which was probably around 2 years ago, when I was 3 years old. I wasn't sure if I had parents. If I did, I didn't remember them. Did they die? Did they abandon me? That thought hurt, but it had already been dulled to the point of just a minor twinge, seeing as how I had obsessed over it for so long already. I could care less right now anyway, given my current situation. After peeking through the cracks, the rain draining into the sewer, I was trying to get a good look of my surroundings through and occasionally dripping into my eyes, which didn't feel too great. I was positive there wasn't anyone around. I didn't know just how strong and powerful ninja could be at that age. It was quite a mistake on my end. I crawled out cautiously, shivering and soaked to the bone, and darted under the slight cover of trees. It wasn't much, but it'd be better than standing out in the open. I wrung out my tattered clothing, standing there in a pair of just as threadbare boxers, and after putting them back on, rolled around in the dirt to feel warmer. It kind of dried me off, at least. Piles and piles of leaves were gathered, and I collected them around a certain spot at the base of a tree before snuggling in and wishing to just go to sleep. The leaves tickled, and I sneezed, blowing a bunch away. Ugh! I was too cold and weak to go get them though, and squeezing my bony, goose-bumped arms, drifted off to sleep, dreaming of an ANBU mask. The mask I recognized as the commander's mask, staring at me right in the face. Wait! I screamed, the shrill sound causing him to jerk back, and darted off again, adrenaline pumping through my veins once again and making me forget the cold temporarily. There was only wild, burning fear. I stumbled, once, twice, and then tripped over a particularly large rock, root, whatever it was, it didn't matter, and lay sprawled on the forest floor, too tired and dizzy to move any further. I had a runny nose, stinging scratches almost immediately healing were crisscrossed on my arms, and I was completely frustrated with my inability to acquire some food. The ANBU crouched in front of me, and I felt ashamed that he was looking at me in those clean, ninja clothing, with shiny new arm guards and other equipment strapped onto him, while I was just this scrawny, starving little kid with nothing to call his own but the frayed, scummy pieces of clothing on his back. I refused to cry though, unwilling to humiliate myself any further, and then he suddenly, without warning, yanked me up and threw me over his shoulder. I wiggled around feebly, but it was impossible to get away in my condition, so I just gave in to the exhaustion, hunger, and residue fear, falling asleep draped over his shoulder. The ANBU commander was a little nervous for the boy. He had brought him into the Hokage's office, and the Hokage had suddenly lurched up out of his chair and was holding the boy gently and tenderly in a flash, placing him on a couch and removing the dirty clothes, if they could even be called clothes, then drying him with a blanket and draping another one over him. He had stared at the boy's face so regretfully, eyes filled with sorrow as he examined the sharp contours of the young child, the hollow cheeks and emaciated figure indicating the boy lived a harsh life. Only then did he look up at the ANBU commander and thank him, eyes shining with true gratitude. The ANBU commander had bowed, telling him there was no need to thank him, and then proceeded to give the details of why Naruto was currently in the Hokage's office. I've been searching for him for so long, and only now he decided to pick the pocket of someone outside of the red light district. No wonder I couldn't find him. The people of the red light district don't like us snooping. Poor child, he's been living all alone by himself in that kind of place. The Sandaime seemed to be murmuring to himself more than to the ANBU commander now, but then seemed to gather his thoughts and straighten up, staring at him in the eye. You brought him here for a reason. What do you plan on doing with him now? The question made him hesitate. He didn't want to just come out and say that the boy was pretty clever and he wanted to recruit young kids to train them as killing machines, because he really wasn't that terrible of a man. Unfortunately, that was part of the reason, not to train him as a killing machine necessarily. An emotionless shinobi was just torture to the individual even if they didn't realize it, but to train him as an ANBU. He did care for the boy, however, and voiced all of that aloud to the man known as Sarutobi-sama. They both stood there in silence, listening to the rain beating in torrents on the window, while studying the still-asleep boy. I suppose there is no better option, the Hokage said reluctantly. The ANBU nodded. The deal was sealed, and Naruto would lead the life of a shinobi from then on, training hard every waking hour for the next couple of years and advancing swiftly, his growing mind able to accept the new concepts quickly and easily. I continued watching the very competent shinobi and kunoichi, all of the ANBU, start on their given tasks, then left, appearing just a couple feet away from the academy entrance on a well-hidden tree branch, and waiting for a good time to slip in. Good thing I was still wearing the orange jumpsuit, after all. It would have been way too bothersome to change in and out of it. Iruka and Mizuki had long already led the students into the classroom, having given up waiting for me. I had the feeling I'd be in for a long lecture once I got back. Sighing, I jumped down, walked inside casually, and peeked inside the classroom door, purposely allowing Iruka to sense my chakra signature and notice me there. He talked to Mizuki, and Mizuki started up where Iruka left off, while he stalked towards the door, a pissed-off expression on his face. I waited out in the hallway, leaning casually against the wall, when the door opened, closed, and Iruka stood there, waiting for an explanation. Hi, sensei, I said cheerfully, and he scowled. Naruto. What took you practically an hour to go to the bathroom? I grinned sheepishly. Indigestion? He looked grossed out. I don't think so, Naruto. That's a lie, and you know it. Now tell me the truth. Come on, sensei. I was annoyed at Sasuke, so I sat in a tree for a while, and I guess I fell asleep or something, because then I fell out of the tree. You fell out of a tree? What were you thinking, sleeping in a tree? I shrugged. He ranted for a couple moments, and I waited, until he finally sighed and rubbed his nose. Naruto, I hope you're not going to do this again. You've been gone from school a lot lately, and I don't want you to fail the test again. It's next week you need to prepare, alright? I smiled. My heart warmed at seeing his concern. Of course, Iruka-sensei. Thank you. I followed him back into the classroom, took my regular seat next to Kiba, and listened to his lesson on how we could improve ourselves. He had memorized every single one of our fights, imprinting it on his mind so that he could remember exactly what every single one of his students needed to work on. Exactly why he was so fit to be an academy teacher. He cared for all his students extensively and equally, helping them whenever possible and giving them input in anything, so long as it was going to help them improve. School ended with nothing else worth mentioning, and I strolled outside, my classmates rushing past me to greet their parents. It's still late, seeing those parents picking up their own kids my age so happily and nonchalantly, everybody taking them for granted. I felt empathy towards Sasuke, whose family was now gone, torn away from him by his older brother, no less. My lips twisted in amusement as a bunch of girls cheerily waved to him and tried to give him a hug as they left, which he did not appreciate. He ducked under their flailing arms, gave me a helpless glance, and ran off, his speed allowing him to escape. I lazily wandered after him, but a specific building caught my eye. Oh yeah, I hadn't visited them yet. Oops, I'd need to visit my teammates before I went and continued a job I hadn't even signed up for. Did that sound bitter? Inside the hospital, I went up to the front desk and opened my mouth to ask the receptionist where Hataki Kakashi and the rest of my team were. The woman gave me a quick, disgusted look before smoothing over her face and giving me a bland expression, and I wrinkled my forehead before realizing yet again that I was Naruto, the stupid, cheerful little boy. Ugh. Taking the Nara's line, how bothersome. By the time I went back, removed the jumpsuit to reveal my ANBU clothes underneath, put on my fixed fox mask which I had received sealed inside a scroll from a messenger, and traveled to the hospital under the disguise as ANBU commander. No, I am the ANBU commander, I told myself. I just have separate identities. 5 minutes had passed. Why did this simple little thing take so long? At the front desk, I handed her a couple photos of my team, and after she looked at them, trying to place a face to a name, she opened her mouth in surprise and furiously searched through the book of patients that they updated daily. They're in rooms 401, 402, and 403. She gave me a nervous smile, and I had to keep from bursting out laughing. Just changing my outfit and a bit of physical features, of all things, I could go from ridiculed and disgusted to feared and respected. How absurd. I nodded at her, took back my hard-earned photos, and set in that direction. Only as I was wandering the hallways looking for the right door did I realize that I could have made a henge instead of changing. I kept myself from groaning aloud, as that would have attracted the unnecessary attention of the medic Neen bustling everywhere. Or, even better, I could have just searched for their chakra signatures amongst all the rest, as I could identify them easily, and just entered through their window from outside. Maybe I really was going crazy from sleep deprivation. Shaking my head, I found the right door in a few more moments, and entered quietly, first trying to quell my irrational fear that Hikigaru and Nico, or even Bor, had died. Of course they hadn't. And they wouldn't, as long as they remained on my team. I'd never allow that to happen, so long as I was their captain. Stepping inside room 401, I noticed Nico and Hikigaru were already awake, talking quietly to someone sitting next to them. Oh, it was Bor, and Inu suddenly came in behind me, holding a glass of water and startled to see someone right in front of the door. Hey Inu, I greeted, and he smiled under his mask, indicated by the fabric shifting around and his eye crinkling upward. No need to be so formal, he commented, subtly pointing out to me that we could call each other by name, and not code name. At least I could. He didn't know me as Naruto, and I shrugged. Thank you, Kitsune, a woman's voice said behind me, and I turned, noticing Hikigaru giving me a wan smile. I would have died, all of us would have died, if you hadn't risked your life for us there. We're ANBU, we should be better, but yet again, you dragged our butts back home with every bit of strength you had left. Again. And so I don't want to keep making you do that, and I don't want to be in those types of situations anymore. Not your fault, of course, don't ever think it is. You need subordinates that are closer to your age, people that can be more agile. And most of us have decided to quit. I'm sorry, but I really wanted to thank you again before, well, you know. It was silent, the atmosphere going from sad and contemplative to bordering on awkward. You know, I really would have liked you to have thanked me, and that's it, I said with a chuckle. You guys know you can quit anytime you want. No need for that long of a soliloquy. Hikigaru, or should I call her Natsuki, blushed, but gestured at Bor to say whatever he wanted to say. Okay, he started uncomfortably. I'm not quitting, just to let you know. But I'm going on hiatus, you could say. So I'm not going to be an active ANBU for a while, until I come back from traveling. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Traveling? Where? He shrugged. Oh, you know, just going around to all the different countries, and learning different shinobi techniques and such, so that I might be able to understand how to counter an enemy's different technique, if that should happen in the future. So, just to be more knowledgeable. I nodded. Good idea, I said, and he relaxed, as if he needed my permission to do this. Ha, 30-something-year-olds, asking permission to do something from a 12-year-old. I wanted to laugh again at the irony. My life was just full of ironic situations, wasn't it? Kakashi was, of course, 26, the youngest of our team except for me, so I wondered why he actually wanted to quit. I voiced my thoughts, and he straightened from his slouch automatically, hearing the authoritative tone in my voice. I cringed. I really needed to fix that. The Hokage's been telling me to quit, as have you. Apparently it's ruining me, you both say, although I could say the same for you, Kitsune. You're even more of a kid. You shouldn't have to be a killer. But anyway, I was suggested to become a Jounin sensei, and I thought, sure, why not try it? So that's what I'm doing, I guess, he ended lamely, but I could tell he was nervous about it. He had been in ANBU since his teens, and suddenly changing his lifestyle like this, I knew he was slightly worried. "Don't worry, you'll do great," I grinned at him, even though they wouldn't be able to see behind my cloth mask, and he scoffed. I was pretty sure he appreciated it though. "Maybe. Well then, Yuko, what are you planning? A Jounin-sensei, like Kakashi?" She nodded. "I don't really think I'd be able to continue as ANBU. As you've told me many times, I don't watch my back often enough, and I'm just too old, as Hikigara said we all kind of were. I'm nearing 40, you know," she said with an embarrassed laugh, "and continuing to live this harsh lifestyle isn't my kind of thing. I'm going to be an academy teacher though, not a Jounin one." We chatted about any random thing after that, and there was a loud cheer from Nico, Bor, and Hikigara when it came up I was ANBU commander. Kakashi just smirked. As far as I could tell, anyway. He had his mask on everywhere. I'd only seen his face once, and although it was weird to say so, I thought he would be considered one of those really cute guys, or super handsome, or whatever. It was probably a family thing though, as he'd said once that the Hatake clan was made up of silver-haired, mask-wearing shinobi. I didn't pry after that. I only wore one underneath my ANBU mask so that if my henge ever dropped my gray eyes, pale skin and dark hair look, at least the whisker-like marks wouldn't be visible. Even if the blonde hair and blue eyes would totally give it away anyway. The nurses shooed me and Kakashi out a little while later, so I shined to the ANBU headquarters out the window, and received reports from many of the lower ANBU who had returned from missions, going over them and filing them into the correct folders. It was monotonous work, but we were already behind, so I couldn't push it aside any more than I already had. A knock sounded on the door, and I called, "Enter," in as professional of a voice I could manage. The person who had knocked stepped in. It was another ANBU returning from a mission, with blood coating his hair and clothes, adding to the already very metallic smell in the room. Sandaime could only go over the truly important missions from higher-ranking ANBU, after all. The rest would report to me, and I would summarize or give the Hokage the most important pieces of information. He handed me his report, and outlined other small details he missed, then bowed and left after I dismissed him. This occurred 2 more times, and by then it was 10:30 p.m., so I decided to go on my mission. To capture and then kill Mizuki-sensei. I followed him home, having already found he always left the school around 10:45 p.m., and pretended to stop at a couple stores while all the time making sure that I knew where he was, and once sensing his chakra signature was getting too far away, I would follow closer again, while all the time still masking my chakra. No matter how careless my opponent was, I could never underestimate them. Kakashi, who had been one of my teachers in the beginning, had told me again and again, a careless shinobi is a dead shinobi. Never underestimate your opponents. It was a good lesson, which was why, in any task, I never showed swaggering confidence. That was the most careless thing I could ever attempt. No, I knew my skills very well, and I took care to go to the extremes of not having Mizuki notice me following him, and followed him all the way home, where I waited outside for hours in the dark and scrunched up underneath those terribly thorny bushes, waiting for him to fall asleep. At around midnight, I crept up the walls outside the apartment without chakra, using the windowsills and other sections of the building to hoist myself up. I couldn't let him detect my chakra, after all. Again, I couldn't underestimate my opponents. The window was easily unlocked when I used a little wind to slide underneath the crack and push the lock, and it curled in my palm like a small kitten, waiting for my command. I smoothed on a silencing seal, pushed up the window, and clambered in silently. My gloved hand closed the window just as silently, and I masked my chakra, held my breath, and used chakra to lighten any footsteps I made. As long as my chakra was directed towards myself and not outwards, it wouldn't usually be sensed. With a couple quick hand signs, the man was bound with stone, gagged, blindfolded and tossed over my shoulder. With a shunshin, I traveled to the interrogation department, where I tossed him in a chair and he struggled off of it and onto the floor, still writhing when I finished my call and Ibiki came strolling in. "Kitsune-san," he nodded at me, and I nodded back. Ibiki-san. Muscled, corded arms reached down and pried away the blindfold, allowing my Chunin instructor to have his vision restored again. His eyes widened. "You will cooperate with us, or else you will be tortured." The night was dark, crickets were singing, and the entrance hall of the torture and investigation department building was silent. Mizuki's eyes were wide, and he made a slow, torturous nod that indicated Kitsune could release his stone bonds, as well as the gag. The man's hands and feet unfroze and he leapt to his feet, already running when he propelled himself into a small, unmoving palm. The ANBU commander's mask mocked him, and he snarled, but Ibiki had already wrapped two muscular arms around the instructor's shoulders and pushed the pale man's wrists together, allowing Kitsune to snap heavy cuffs over them. The black metal glinted. How did you meet Orochimaru? Why did he tell you about this potion that you have been planning to make? The young, white-haired man gritted his teeth. I was on a mission. Oh? And what sort of mission were you on? Ibiki leaned in close while Kitsune hung back, allowed to stay and watch simply because of his high rank. Mizuki was flat on his back, drips of water having been plunked on his forehead again and again, for hours, until he started screaming and shouting, twitching but unable to move his head. Ibiki had stopped the torture, since Mizuki had been unwilling to speak at first but now appeared to be weaker. I went with my team to retrieve something. I forget what. Orochimaru came up to me because I killed my injured teammate. Ah, so now he was finally admitting it. Orochimaru praised me. He said I was strong. He said I could help him, if I'd like to, and he said I could become stronger. I took the offer. It was a recipe for strength. A strength beyond any normal strength. A strength only for the determined. A strength. That's enough. That would allow me to soar above all my companions and beat them into the ground with ease. Thought would help me, thought would make me stronger, stronger, stronger. Quiet. Ibiki allowed a steady drop of water to ping off the delirious Mizuki's forehead again, and he started screaming almost immediately. The torturer stopped. Mizuki also stopped. He then turned to me and nodded. I suppose that we have gathered enough information. We must watch for Orochimaru. He may have only played around with Mizuki, but he must have other plans for Konoha to risk traveling so close and going so far as to contact a Leafnin, albeit at the time, possibly traitorous Leafnin. He shook his head. I'll be taking my leave now, he said, and nodded respectfully as he brushed past and out of the torture rooms. Mizuki, I murmured, and he glanced at me, eyes slightly clearer now. His delirium from the torturous water, apparently it felt like a sledgehammer was slamming into your head if it continued for too long, was starting to fade, and a guarded look again came up as he salvaged what pride he could find, staring into my eyes as best as possible, given I was wearing an ANBU mask. I released my henge, took off my porcelain and cloth mask, and in those moments, he found out Uzumaki Naruto's true identity. Or maybe the other way around. He found the new ANBU commander's true identity. Either way, he was surprised to say the least, and he stared, mouth open. A kunai whipped across the tender flesh of his throat, and sickly red liquid spurted out. How could you ever? He choked, and then the last breath he would ever take left his throat in a whisper. He was dead. I wiped my kunai on his clothing, and then called for a lower-ranking shinobi with a convenient little button at the front of the door. Mission complete. I yawned. 5M. After quickly taking a shower and throwing on my ANBU outfit, I ate some slightly burned eggs, drank 2 cups of milk, and settled into my seat in headquarters. After filing away a bunch of junk, reports, on my desk, I received information on the previous commander's death. His heart had been destroyed by a medical technique called the chakra scalpel. How had that been possible? I had them find out where he had been the previous night, who had come into contact with him any time and day, all the while suspiciously wondering if one of them, or any of the ANBU for that matter, could be the culprit. I was pretty sure they were wondering the same about me, if they weren't guilty. I rested my cheek on my hand and sighed. This was pretty much what I had expected, a bunch of busywork and paperwork waiting for me day after day. The routine of receiving and filing away mission reports ate away at me until I was dying of boredom at 7:20, so much so that I quickly hurried to school 25 minutes beforehand. Irika looked at me strangely as I walked in, and I looked down at what I was wearing. No, I had not accidentally walked in with only my ANBU clothing. No, my tattoo was not visible. It had been altered, too, to allow me to call ANBU at my whim. Responsibly, of course, so it was even more prominent, but that wasn't it. He was probably wondering why I was so early again, as did Sasuke and Shino. Even Sakura, the pink-haired little fangirl, wasn't here yet. I smiled cheekily at him, dissipating his worries and any suspicions about anything, then sat next to Sasuke, obnoxiously chattering loudly about ramen, then the spar we had yesterday, and then about the upcoming graduation exam. He looked supremely bored and annoyed and pained at the same time that I took it as a sign of improvement. At least he was showing some emotion. Class started, and the rest of the week whirled by until it was Tuesday, the day of our graduation exams. The day started out slightly gray and overcast, but I sucked out the water from the clouds into a huge sphere of rain and poured it into the ground, doing that until the clouds lightened a little, not as full of water anymore. Ha! There. I just temporarily beat nature, even though there was now a small lake randomly in the middle of the forest. I triumphantly sauntered to the academy, putting up the boisterous and boastful facade until it was my turn. I knew Sasuke would graduate this year. I had been studying his skills year after year, and I knew he was good enough to pass by now, so I had no qualms about finally passing the exam. I didn't have to pretend to fail myself anymore. Yes, without Mizuki there to help, Iruka had his hands full, and didn't pay much attention to the fact that with little to no effort I passed the written exam, along with the taijutsu spars and ninjutsu demonstrations, just the basic ones. Those that thought they may end up with too low scores to pass could also show Iruka their genjutsu skills if they had any, which could possibly earn them points if the genjutsu was stable and working, and maybe allow them to pass, as long as the rest of their skills weren't too terrible, of course. We all, to the relief of many, passed, and my classmates brandished their new hitayatesh proudly, so I imitated their behavior. Sasuke appeared bored, as if he was expecting to pass, which I suppose he was, but couldn't the guy at least smile? I decided to make him, after shoving through all the fangirls crowding around him. Hey Sasuke! Ha see? I passed. You said I wouldn't, and called me a dobe, but I'm not and I passed. So there. I tapped my shiny Hittite proudly. I'd be returning it to the Hokage later, seeing as how I already had one, since I was 5, I might add, but for now, this was the one I had earned with my identity of simple little Uzumaki Naruto, so I'd be wearing it. HN. What, you aren't happy you passed? You'd rather have failed? He gave me a sideways look that seemed to say, of course not, dobe, what are you thinking? The answer he gave wasn't that though. HN. Say something other than HN, or I'm going to keep bothering you. Shut up, dobe. He smirked. I left in a huff, inwardly smiling. I was getting really good at this. After that, I chatted a little with Kiba, Chuji, and Shikamaru, and the day ended with my usual visit to the office, filing reports and making sure that there wasn't anything weird any of the ANBU had found. My dinner consisted of 3 large slices of bread and a quarter of a jar of peanut butter, along with a couple tomatoes to balance it all out, and then I went to rest. Tomorrow we be assigned our genin teams, and take the test our sensei assigned us. I wondered who my sensei would be. Good morning, everyone, Iruka said happily, looking at all of us with pride. I think he gave me an especially big smile. I grinned back. Good morning, Iruka-sensei, everybody chorused. Many of them had wanted to know what had happened to Mizuki-sensei, as we usually said, good morning, Iruka-sensei and Mizuki-sensei, but Iruka had just said Mizuki had caught a really bad sickness, and wouldn't be back for the rest of the school year. We'd be gone after that, so there was no need to worry about any of us finding out it was a lie. Well, except for me of course, since I had been the one to personally kill him, but I had also jumped in when everybody asked questions, so it wasn't like I was suspicious. And besides, it was my job. My duty to Konoha to kill him. Mizuki had not been taken to the jail we often put traitorous shinobi and kunoichi into. They simply wasted Konoha's time and resources and had about 0.01% chance of repenting. Most of them simply sat and seethed in anger, plotting out Konoha's demise while rotting away in jail. It wasn't worth it to keep any traitors around. After realizing my mind was drifting again, I yanked my attention back to Iruka-sensei. The teams will be made up of 3 people, based on your strengths and weaknesses. So, Team 1 will be. Then, Team 7 will consist of Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura, and Uchiha Sasuke. Yees. Sakura screeched, then jabbed a finger in the direction of Yamanaka Ino and said smugly, Ha! Take that, Ino! I pretended to groan and glare at Sasuke. Inside though, I was practically screaming with happiness. Well, with as much happiness that you can feel when you think your mission is going to get easier. As Haruno and Yamanaka competed for dominance in their screaming match, I wondered how I could have ever pretended to have a crush on Sakura for as long as I did. I had decided, when I first entered the academy, to pretend I had a crush on someone just to seem all the more like a little kid, and I had continued my crush on Sakura all the way until the middle of last year, when enough was enough. Seriously. It was way too tiring trying to act like you liked someone and purposely humiliating yourself to continue your act, and then have said someone smack you on the head and make lovey-dovey eyes at the Rookie of the Year. Uchiha, of course. Iruka tore Ino and Sakura apart, and they sat down with a huff, looking contrite and meekly nodding their heads after Iruka gave a short lecture on respect. He continued reading the list. Team 8 will consist of Inuzuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, and Hyuga Hinata. The only complaint was from Kiba, who pretty much boasted or complained his way through life, I had figured. He was, otherwise, a good guy though. I realized they were a tracking team. Last team, Team 10, will consist of Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, and Akimichi Tsuji, led by Asuma-sensei. Irika paused. Oh right, Team 8 sensei will be led by Yuhi Kurenai. Team 7 will be led by Kakashi-sensei. Team 6, Kakashi-sensei? Why did that sound, oh man. Well, did not expect that. I managed to keep my composure though, and asked eagerly, who's that? What does he look like? Is he super cool and awesome, or weird and, Naruto, keep your mouth shut for just a moment. I sat down, acting annoyed, while inside I was threatening my snickering classmates that I would kill them if they laughed at me again. Not literally, of course. God knows it could be quite literal, quite easily, he sighed. You'll see once he gets here, Naruto. He can introduce himself then. I harumphed, crossed my arms, and stuck my tongue out at him. God, this was so fun. Too bad the other, trained and professional ANBU side of me felt completely bored and annoyed at having to play such a role. Yuhi Kurenai and Sarutobi Asuma. I had talked to that guy once, seeing as how he was the Hokage's son and all, and man, did he get sullen and childish when around his father, stepped into the classroom, calling out their team numbers and having their respective students follow them out. I knew Kakashi was going to be hours late, so I decided to pull out a couple of reports I had stuffed into my backpack. They were written in code, so it wouldn't be too much trouble if Sasuke or Sakura got curious. I read through them, decoding it quickly, then put them in specific folders I had set up so I could quickly put them into the right file at my office. Sasuke pretended to be wandering around the room, but I noticed his discreet glances at my papers as he passed behind me, and I finally turned around, sighed, and asked him, "You need something?" He gave me a startled glance, and then turned away. Sakura came up too, not even bothering to pretend she wasn't looking at them, and read, "The 3 big birds flew east, while the 4 smaller birds flew southeast, then curved towards east and met at their nests. They all greeted each other happily and," she stopped. "What the heck are you doing, Naruto? Why are you reading some weird paper on birds?" Even Uchiha looked confused, so I sighed inwardly, glad they hadn't caught on. If they did, then well, first of all, that meant they were kind of talented, and second of all, there'd be a lot of quick, valid excuses thought up on the fly, which I really didn't feel up to doing. The minutes ticked by, and I finished with the reports. After looking out the door and into the hallway multiple times, earning a reproach from Haruno, an idea suddenly popped into my head. I lugged a stool over, then stood on top of it, and wedged a blackboard eraser between the slidable door and the door frame. "Wait a second, Naruto. What are you doing?" I cackled evilly. Sakura scowled at me. "Hey, it'll be his fault because he's late," I admonished her, hopping off the stool. "You're really asking for it," Sakura warned me. Sasuke told me haughtily that a jounin wouldn't fall prey to such a simple prank, and Sakura immediately agreed, while simultaneously calling me an idiot. I could tell she wanted to join in though, by the way she sometimes stood on tiptoe and peered out the sliver of open doorway, glancing at the eraser with a light in her eyes, her fingers curling in excitement. To simply put it, a ditz. She didn't even say what she wanted to say or do because she was afraid that would make a boy, a mere classmate, like her less. I scoffed. Thankfully, the door decided to slide open at that time, and I watched, fascinated, as Hitaki Kakashi, the copy ninja and the son of the White Fang, really did fall prey to such a simple prank. The blackboard eraser fell without the door stabilizing it, and with a clunk, dropped on Kakashi's head. Dust flew into the air, and he paused, 1 foot inside the classroom. I burst out laughing, grinning at him. He had his usual mysterious air about him, but I had gotten used to reading him, and he was definitely annoyed. Sakura quickly tried apologizing, putting all the blame on me, but I noticed a twinkle of satisfaction in her eyes. I noticed Sasuke staring at him with narrowed eyes, and I could tell he doubted the authenticity of Kakashi's skill. Kakashi stared at the blackboard eraser in his hand, then put his other hand on his chin, and seemed to be thinking very deeply. How do I put this? Then, he stared at us, and said, "My first impression of you 3, well, I hate you. Way to be blunt, Kakashi. Meet me on the roof of the school building, and we'll introduce ourselves." We sat on the steps, Kakashi facing us while leaning on the railing. He had us introduce ourselves, and we did, I making myself seem like a delusional, ramen-loving kid, Sakura making it obvious she lived only for Sasuke as a fangirl, and Sasuke establishing his arrogance and vengeance. Man, that really needed to be worked on. By the end of it, all we had learned from Kakashi was his name, as he said, "Me? My name's Kakashi Hitaki. I don't feel like telling you guys about my likes and dislikes. I've never really thought about my dream future. As for my hobbies, I have many. Sakura had said with a very disgruntled face. In the end, isn't all we know about him his name? Unfortunately, his turn was over, so we had given basic summaries of ourselves, as I had stated earlier. After that little part, he told us we would be receiving a mission tomorrow. I had acted very eager and anticipatory, but after he revealed it was a survival exercise, Sakura and I frowned, confused. At least, she was, and I'm sure that the Uchiha was too, deep down. Very, very deep down, but there, nonetheless. Of the 27 graduates, only 9 will become actual genin shinobi. The remaining 18 will be sent back to the academy. In other words, this is a survival exercise with a failure rate of 66% or higher. Well, after that bomb was dropped, there was a stunned, shocked silence, and he told us, we meet at 5 in the morning. Well, you're dismissed. Oh, and you'd best skip breakfast. You'll throw up otherwise. Sakura shouted at me as I slowly ambled over to them at around 9:30 a.m. What are you doing, coming so late? And why isn't Kakashi-sensei here? I made a face. How would I know that? And anyway, I thought that if he was hours late yesterday, he'd be super late today too, so I took my time eating breakfast, she spluttered. Sasuke also looked at me, frowning as he wondered why I had decided to throw up later on. Haha, you guys are so stupid. I mean, who doesn't eat when they're preparing for a mission? We'll need our energy later on. They both paused, looking slightly embarrassed, Sakura, or annoyed they hadn't realized that, Sasuke. I pulled out a scroll from my scroll pouch, checked if it was the right one. We couldn't have a bunch of shiny, deadly weapons only reserved for Jounin or ANBU suddenly pop out, and bit my thumb, spreading a thin trail of blood on the inked paper and allowing fresh baked loaves of bread, some rice and bean buns, and assorted fruit appear out of the smoke. They stared at it hungrily. Go ahead and eat, I seriously think you should, I offered graciously, biting into a pear myself. They both ate their breakfast after that, and I had just cleaned up everything when Kakashi appeared. Hey guys. Good morning. You're late. Sakura and I screamed at him, our fingers pointing furiously at our sensei. Well, a black cat crossed my path, you see, he offered, and then cleared his throat when met with blank stares and "You've got to be kidding me" looks. He paused. Is that breakfast I smell on your breaths? Humph. He turned his nose up dramatically. Fine. See if I care when you throw all that food up later. How attractive that will be. Sakura had a pinched look on her face. Kakashi explained the test, setting the timer for 12 o'clock, and saying our objective was to attain the 2 bells he was currently holding, which he tied onto his belt. If we couldn't get the bells by then, he'd tie us to 3 wooden logs, he pointed at them, and eat our lunch happily right in front of us. Only then did the other 2 realize that was why he had had us not eat breakfast. But wait a second. Why are there only 2 bells? Sakura's sharp mind caught onto that right away, so with a gleeful expression, at least, as gleeful as he could look with only a 3-square-inch area of his face visible, he told us at the most, only 1 person would be tied to the log, and 2 people would pass. That person unfortunately tied to the log would be sent back to the academy. However, if we were still unable to snatch a bell from him by noon, then all 3 of us would fail. So he was trying to split us up. This was probably about teamwork. He had drilled into my head the first time we met, which was when I was 6 and starting my career as a shinobi. Those who break the rules and regulations are regarded as trash, but those that abandon their comrades instead are even worse than trash. It was stuck in my head even years later, and I had integrated good teamwork into my team of ANBU as a result. Kakashi had been quite happy with me. I smirked. I knew his objective. Now all I had to do was get Sakura and Sasuke to work with me. Kakashi attached the 2 bells back on. You can use your weapons. You won't be able to take the bells unless you come with the intent to kill me. But that's dangerous, sensei. Sakura protested, looking apprehensive. I agreed, chuckling to cover up my nervousness, and said, yeah, you couldn't even evade a chalkboard eraser. In the shinobi world, those who aren't skilled enough tend to complain more. Well, I'll just ignore the loser, Kakashi said in a bored tone, effectively drawing out the 3 of us. Begin when I give you the signal. He had barely finished his sentence when I rushed forward, a kunai spinning on my finger and then clenched in my fist as I stabbed at him messily head-on. I needed to establish my recklessness, and never thinking before doing this as Naruto. Obviously, Kakashi just grabbed my wrist, set a hand on the back of my head, and yanked the sharp away from him and towards my own bare neck from behind, startling my other 2 teammates. I was released a moment later, and I backed up, grinning inwardly. He just had to show off. A little speech later, ready start. My stupidity established from the start, I allowed Kakashi to catch me in trap after trap. attempting again and again to face off with him without hiding and following the basic shinobi rules. I could see the "how did this guy even pass" look in his eyes clearly even from here, 40 feet away. I finally decided to duck into the bushes, and allowed him to evaluate Sasuke's skills. Both of us appraised his talent with fire jutsu, and I nodded in acknowledgement at his speed. Eventually, Sasuke was buried in the ground up to his neck, and Sakura was caught in Kakashi's genjutsu. I released them both, all of us crouching behind bushes in a small clearing and the two of them waiting for me to say something. Since I had freed them from their traps, there was an obvious expectation that I wanted something. "What are you doing, Do?" I shushed him. "I think we should all work together to get the bells from him. 3 genin working together should be able to defeat a jounin, right?" He narrowed his eyes at me. "There's only 2 bells, so after you take one, who'll get the other bell? Sakura or me?" I shrugged. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. You already know you can't defeat him by yourself. So we have to work together to get the bells in the first place." They thought for a while, and then both of them nodded slowly. I cleared my throat. "So, what we're going to do is, Sakura, you're going to cast a genjutsu on him. You're good at those, right?" She nodded, blushing slightly at the indirect compliment, and I turned to Sasuke. "I can distract him with my Kage Bunshin, and you can combat him with fire jutsu so Sakura can grab the bells while he's distracted with both of us. That's what the genjutsu is for, so he won't notice you coming for the bells." They both nodded automatically, but then Sasuke frowned, wondering why he had responded so easily to that authoritative tone from Naruto, of all people, and muttered, "Who went and made you leader?" He sped off after that though, not allowing me to reply and having me assume he was putting the plan in motion. I shrugged, then reminded Sakura to settle the genjutsu on Kakashi after we had distracted him, and created my trustworthy Kage Bunshin. So yeah, I shouldn't know the technique as a genin, but he could assume I'd learned it from the Sandaime, and if he didn't, and instead asked the Hokage about it, the Hokage could still spin up some tale of teaching the technique to me anyway. My teammates charged forward while I waited in the bushes. If I had to, I'd cast a quick, hard genjutsu and grab the bells myself. Then I'd cast a genjutsu on everyone else so they would think Sakura grabbed the bells from Kakashi, when I really just handed it to her. No one would know, and then Kakashi would have to pass us because we had worked together to the best of our abilities and even obtained our goal. That was an awesome, terrible plan. My clones disoriented him, accidentally happening to bend down or trip really fast when he tried to stab them, which allowed the kunai to pass over them, and then happening to simply jump all over the place and not receive a single hit from Kakashi. Sasuke blew his fireballs, which served to distract Kakashi further since he couldn't burrow under the ground when my clones were hanging onto him, and he had to dodge, unable to get a good chance to Kawarii. I snickered. The light genjutsu had set in place by now, and Sakura darted forward, her hand outstretched. She yanked on the 2 bells and they disappeared with a poof, along with Kakashi, leaving my clones to tumble all over each other. I sighed, dispelled them, and the 3 of us grouped together in the bushes again. "Good job, Sakura. You were still able to grab the bells." I tried to encourage the girl, but she frowned and shook her head. "I didn't even do anything. All I did was make a crappy genjutsu on a clone." Sasuke bit out, "Come on, we don't have the time for this. Let's think of another plan." I nodded with approval. Sasuke was finally referring to the 3 of us as a group. This time, our plan was to have Sakura set up an illusion of all 3 of us attacking. Meanwhile, inside the genjutsu, I would grab hold of him and Kakashi would stand still, allowing Sasuke and my clone charge him in real life and the actual me turned into a Saban needle. Hopefully, Kakashi wouldn't be able to differentiate between the genjutsu me's and the real clone me's. At least for a second. Sasuke would maneuver the Saban needle, me, onto Kakashi's clothing, and I'd burst into existence and hopefully not have to tear a large hole in Kakashi's flak jacket, which the needle would be stuck into. While doing this, it usually didn't work that way, and after bursting into existence, I'd grab the bells and make a run for it. That was the most basic but hopefully still functional plan I could come up with, at least. We could only hope for it to work. The genjutsu set in heavily. I and Sasuke rushed in together, as Sasuke was holding me in Saban needle form. My clones and the people Sakura created from her genjutsu were currently rushing him from behind, in front, left, right, and most of all above, with some of them hinged into Sasuke or Sakura, and others hinged into animals. That could serve to confuse Kakashi for a little longer, and cause him to think my clones hinged into animals were part of the genjutsu. Sasuke darted forward, sprinting around Kakashi, and then jumping up and sailing over the man, throwing me still in needle form onto Kakashi and latching me in the middle of his back. I waited a moment, waiting until he was mostly still to poof into existence, and immediately reached for the bells. I could see the victory, right in front of my eyes. But I could also sense Kakashi realizing this and ready to turn. In a burst of unnatural speed for a genin, I yanked the 2 silver bells off his belt, the metal cool in my clenched palm as I escaped into the surrounding forest. Hopefully, he wouldn't realize that trip up. Yeah, right. He'd definitely be questioning me later. Before I could start formulating any excuses in my head, Sakura ambushed me, jumping in front of me and asking me excitedly if I had gotten the bells. I confirmed it, smiling widely, while inside I was still worried about the situation with Kakashi. Sasuke also demanded to see the bells, for once actually showing intense emotion, and I dangled them in front of his eyes. He paused, realizing yet again that there were only 2. Well? Who's going to be sent back to the academy? A foreign voice appeared from behind all of us. I calmly ripped apart the 2 bells and was about to hand them to Sasuke and Sakura when Sakura jumped forward, grabbing one and shoving it into Sasuke's hand. Sensei, it'll be me. Because I didn't do much. All I did was cast Genjutsu, while Sasuke and Naruto did all the work. Sasuke stared at her openly, then shook his head and placed the bell into her open palm he was gripping. No, I actually did the least. All I did was throw Naruto in Saban needle form, and that was all that was needed for the plan. Guys, seriously, I'm okay with being sent back to the academy. Sasuke, don't you have a goal? And Sakura, you wouldn't want to take an entire year of the academy again, would you? You both have the bells, and I'll fail. I'll just find another way to pass. Kakashi laughed. A small chuckle at first, then all-out guffawing at the end. You all pass. What? Why? You just said only 2 of us would pass. He giggled some more, before gathering himself and explaining. This was a test to see if you would work together instead of selfishly doing things for yourself. In the shinobi world you might have to work with allies you don't like, but you still have to work together, and be good at it to defeat the enemy. You all did wonderful. I'm surprised that you even thought of doing this. I was planning to, if you guys failed at this, tie one person to the log and have the other 2 eat their lunches, explicitly telling you guys weren't allowed to share your food. Of course, the point of that would be to get you guys to work as a team, even with terrible consequences. You 3 however well, I guess you 3 are different. He smiled. I cheered loudly, Sakura grinned happily, and even Sasuke smiled. It had been relaxing to mess around with D-rank missions for a while. Catching Tora the cat reminded me of the times when I was 4 and trying to catch Mia the cat, and Sasuke and I had established some kind of rivalry between us. We constantly worked to get better than the other. Our first conversation went something like this. Stop. Where do you even get that energy? Sasuke was panting and demanding for a moment of rest, but I was still thrumming with energy as we sparred and Kakashi pushed Sakura to complete difficult, muscle-building exercises. I shrugged. I don't know how your parents even deal. He stopped after I purposely stiffened. I had been trained to have no reaction, and after automatically stopping myself from reacting, I had to relax and allow myself to react normally. The dark-haired boy didn't apologize, but I could tell he felt slightly guilty for saying that. We started up the spar and he skidded back again, wiping the sweat off his forehead. I paused, then said, How do you know all these techniques? His mouth flattened into a straight line. At first I thought he wasn't going to answer me, but then as our kunai shook against the other, and we dropped our hands, he said quietly, My clan? All the members of my clan taught me the shinobi arts. I have still retained them. There was pride in that last sentence, and I ventured I have bad form, don't I? He scoffed. Hey, come on, Amo Sasuke, teach me. He raised an eyebrow at that, and I shrugged. Kakashi-sensei's definitely not helping. I suppose he sympathized with that, as he shrugged and said, Before Kakashi gets here then. I'm not going to make extra time to teach a dobe like you. I smirked viciously. Oh yeah? You still think I'm a dobe? Then take this. I pounced at him, and he met the challenge. The team training ended after another couple of minutes, and we were dismissed, while I returned to my apartment and traveled out in a different identity, ready for a much higher level mission. However, the Hokage was now requesting me to request for AC rank as Uzumaki Naruto. Loudly. Brashly. With as much whining as possible. Seriously? I nodded though, because a respectful shinobi's duty was to take on any mission without any complaint. It wouldn't do to disrespect the Hokage. After bowing and being dismissed, I shined away, returning to my apartment to change into a pair of cleaner, less bloody pair of clothes and topping it over with the regular orange jumpsuit. Before dawn arrived, long before going to meet my team, I visited my office to work out something with the ANBU. The Hokage had found a couple of decent, recently promoted jounin, and he was recommending them to take the tests to get into ANBU. The exercises were always different, but recently I had wanted to try something else, or at least add a new section to it. Some of the ex-Konoha ANBU usually proctored these tests, so I'd have to inform them of my idea. The whole process took hours, with papers filled with designs and information spread all over the table by the time I was finished. I yawned, tears gathering at the corners of my eyes. The ex-ANBU frowned. Probably didn't approve of me yawning, since I was the commander. Well, too bad. People yawned. Get over it, lady. She left, probably to inform the other ex-ANBU helping, and I'd come back from the mission just a couple of days before the tests began. At least, if it all went according to plan. Naruto! What took you so long? Even Kakashi-sensei arrived on time today. I winced at the loud, shrill sound, my headache only worsening from this. Calm down, Sakura, I'm here, aren't I? So there's no need to yell at me, I mumbled. Well, wasn't that a little out of character? Anyway, are we getting another mission today? Come on, let's go. I raced off towards the mission building, and they followed at a calmer pace. We arrived in the missions building, me striding in and earning a sharp, piercing gaze from the Hokage. I nodded subtly. Let's see, the Hokage pretended to scan the list of D-rank missions. Oh. How about going to babysit the… come on, Gigi. I don't want another D-rank mission. Naruto. You idiot, don't you know that a genin like you can only do D-rank missions? Irika was the one who shouted this. Naruto-kun. There are different requests every day, ranging from babysitting to assassinations. They are placed into 4 different categories, based on their difficulty. A, B, C. I tuned the Hokage out, faced the other wall, and started pretending to plan my daily ramen meals. I rarely ate them all that much now, but when I did, they were pretty enjoyable. Ichiraku's was, of course, the best. Naruto. Are you even paying attention? I complained some more, Gigi argued some more, and then, fine. Sakura and Sasuke looked up, surprised that I had won the ridiculous argument. You will be bodyguards for someone. I excitedly asked who it was, and he called someone in. The man stumbled in, gulping down sake. A little drunk, but still stable enough to walk around normally. Humph. Who's the little runt? Okay, so, obviously it was me. Sasuke and Sakura were taller. Kind of sucked, but at least my size meant I had more speed. I pretended to not understand though, laughing and asking who it was. My 2 teammates stepped closer, making it obvious I was shorter. I exploded, and Kakashi had to restrain me from attacking our client. Well, mission complete. We had secured a C-rank mission. I waited in the trees, concealing my chakra as usual, and realized there were already 2 enemies waiting on the opposite side of the road, hiding in the forest like I was. As my clone, Sakura, Sasuke, and Kakashi strolled out of the mission's building, I watched my clone subtly glance around suspiciously before creating another clone. That new copy of me immediately dispelled, sending me the previous information. So Kakashi had been informed that an ANBU would be following along, as somehow, the Hokage had discovered this mission was not a mere C-rank. But given the situation in Wave Country, he pretended not to know, opting to instead have my team take the risky mission, and that way, an ANBU and an ex-ANBU would be able to deal with any problems that arose on this actually A-ranked mission. My clone made a big fuss about being outside of the village for the first time, although, as an ANBU, I had already gone out of the village to perform hundreds of S-ranked missions over the years. As the day wore on and we traveled at a more sedate pace, I noticed the 2 enemy nin were hiding themselves in a puddle. My team trekked by, and Kakashi substituted himself at the last second when the 2 of them swung large, clunky chains around him. Shhhhrk. It appeared to have sliced him into bits. The team screamed, and then they headed for my clone, which would most likely poof into non-existence if harmed at all. My clone backed up, pushing away Tazuna and Sakura and unfortunately having the chain pass through it since there was no room to move out of the way. Sasuke handled the 2 chains, throwing a shuriken and kunai and effectively trapping the chains onto a tree. Nice. Sakura started at the clone disappearing, but fortunately my clone had made another clone which had then gone to hide in the forest until its creator disappeared. It then jumped in, presumably as the real Naruto, darting behind the enemy nin rushing at Sakura who was trying to protect Tazuna. Before it reached them though, Kakashi suddenly appeared, wrapping both muscular arms around their necks and squeezing, effectively cutting off their air supply. They choked, then fell unconscious for a moment, which gave him all the time he needed to chain them to a tree. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura squealed, beyond relieved that he was alive. My clone, stunned, turned to look at the apparent remains of Kakashi, and realized it was just a couple of pieces of wood. Everything was back to normal, with my clone and Sasuke respecting each other's ability to react in a battle. Kakashi praised all three of us for being able to react so quickly, and the journey continued, with Sasuke stealing glances at my clone with suspicion. Sasuke couldn't believe that Naruto was suddenly, out of the blue, oh so great at creating plans, planning out such elaborate battles on the fly, at least for a fresh out of the academy genin, such as the time during Kakashi-sensei's test, and then now, when he had replaced himself with a clone in order to make the enemy attack the clone, and then be ambushed by the real one. When had the Naruto in the academy ever been able to think like that? Something was off here, and he could tell Kakashi thought so too. Meanwhile, Kakashi, although he assumed Naruto to just be hiding a bit of talent for thinking through pretty decent plans behind a mask of stupidity, didn't think that a graduated academy student would have been able to move with that speed during his test. He hadn't asked the boy himself about it, but was suspicious of the fact that Naruto had been able to grab the bell so quickly and easily. Far too quickly for a genin. No genin had that kind of speed, maybe not even Chunin. It strangely reminded him of his ex-ANBU captain. For some reason, his captain liked to trick his opponents, making them think he was slow and allowing them to get very, very close, before suddenly, with a tremendous burst of speed, slit their throat before their opponents could even blink. Huh. Strange that they acted a little similar. He kept his mind from going down a different, scarier route. While on the boat that silently skimmed the water towards Wave Country, Kakashi decided it was time to question Tazuna, that is, about the recent battle and the motives behind it. Yes, he knew the situation. Yes, he knew the ANBU that had been following them had probably already arrived at Wave Country and was waiting for Team 7 to arrive, ready to fight off any enemy shinobi that would prove too much for him. He had slacked off lately, and his muscles had become accustomed to the calmer, less in danger environment, which would not bode well with trying to defeat the enemy shinobi. However, he wanted the client to admit it, just to prove to him that he was protecting a good man, an honest person that would care about the lives of his protectors. At least, his students would learn of the situation, and hopefully Naruto would not immediately jump into a fight. Even if his bright, cheerful student was actually quite smart underneath the ridiculous orange, against an S-ranked shinobi, the newly made genin wouldn't stand a chance. Hopefully, they'd run their client their first priority, and hopefully, they'd leave him and the supposed-to-be hidden ANBU to deal with whoever would attack them. Tazuna-sama, I would like to ask you a question before we reach the land. Just who are the people attacking you, and what for? If you don't answer us, this mission may end after we dock. Kakashi had softly told Tazuna of all the mistakes and wrong information, and warned him that it wouldn't do to lie. Tazuna had been quite sorry, and now Kakashi was waiting for the old bridge builder to give his side of the story. Everybody was paying attention now, and with the surrounding mist, it gave a secretive feeling, finally urging the old man to speak. It appears I have no choice but to tell you, he sighed, and continued in his gravelly voice, looking up at the shinobi watching him intently. Frankly, I'd like you to listen. Just as you said, this may be beyond the scope of your mission. To be honest, I am being targeted by a terrifying man. A terrifying man? Kakashi questioned, giving a doubtful tone to his voice. Who? You guys have probably heard at least his name before. A shipping magnate by the name of Gatu. What? Gatu? Gatu of the Gatu Company? One of the world's richest men? Kakashi's eyes widened dramatically. Who? What? Naruto asked, inserting excitement into his voice. On the surface, he's the chief executive of a shipping company, but underneath, he is into drug trafficking and deals in contraband using gangs and ninjas. Moreover, he runs a despicable business, ruthlessly taking over nations and enterprises. It was about a year ago, when that man set his eyes on the land of the waves. He used his wealth and violence to enter this country, and before anyone knew it, he had taken complete control of the island maritime transportation and shipping. His explanation of Gatu continued, describing him as a terrible, ruthless man, using anything at his disposal and easily pushing around small countries like the land of the waves. There was no heart to this man, only doing things for his own benefit and controlling everything and everybody. The only thing in his way was the under-construction bridge, spanning from land of the waves to Fire Country. If the bridge was finished, the predicament of Wave Country would be known, the information would be spread, and Fire Country would with no qualms kick out Gatu. Team 7 started muttering among themselves, but Kakashi asked Tazuna straight out why they had not given that information in the first place. Tazuna said with defeat that they had no money, not even the feudal lord. He attempted to blackmail them by getting their pity for his family, failing terribly, before Kakashi relented. He bent his head down, scratching his hitate. Well, I guess we have no choice. The person rowing the boat suddenly and quietly announced they were arriving, stating they didn't seem to have been noticed yet. Tazuna thanked him as they stepped onto the dock, and the man cranked up the motor and went off. "Get me home safely now," the old man announced, and they trudged off in the direction of his house, Tazuna guiding them. Kakashi shook his head morbidly. Next time, it wouldn't be Chunin, but elite-level Jounin attacking. He could only hope that the ANBU would be able to handle the situation if worst came to worst. Kakashi couldn't sense the ANBU's chakra signature anywhere, but he or she was most likely hiding it. It yet again reminded him of Kitsune, his team captain and now the ANBU commander. The gray-eyed, 12-year-old boy, whose true identity he didn't even know, was very talented. Naruto the clone continued acting stupid. He pretended to be angry that Sasuke was as good as him in a battle, and wanted to prove he was better. He randomly shot a kunai, which was actually just a small piece of gauze he transformed, into the bushes, looking this way and that wildly. "Oh, that was just a mouse," he said languidly, and continued whipping his head back and forth, suddenly shooting another piece of gauze transformed into a kunai into the bushes again, immediately pushing through the brambly plants to check his target. Sakura came up and banged him on the head, and he whined, inwardly thankful it wasn't hard enough to dispel his chakra-constructed body. Tazuna shouted at him. Sasuke stood behind looking annoyed, and Sakura kept threatening to hit him on the head again. Meanwhile, Kakashi was wading into the bushes, noticing the poor, quivering rabbit's blade against the tree, the kunai stuck in the wood right above its head. The clone could almost see the gears whirring in Kakashi's head. It was a snow rabbit, but snow rabbit's fur only turned white during the winter, and the one he was currently hugging had fur as white as freshly fallen snow. It was obvious it had been raised inside, most likely to be used as an object for Kawarimi. Kitsune nodded at his clone's good thinking. It had gotten Kakashi on guard, which was obviously his own mind, but he hadn't thought of that because he hadn't been in that situation. Whatever, he liked complimenting himself. "Everybody, get down!" Kakashi shouted, and the small group ducked just as an enormous sword whirled above their heads and swung back, embedding itself into a tree and allowing the man who'd thrown it to drop down onto the handle. Everyone stared at the lithe, muscled figure balancing on the intimidating sword, fear settling in a couple pairs of eyes. Nevertheless, the shinobi settled into defensive stances, adrenaline already pumping through their veins. Well, if it isn't the rogue ninja of the hidden mist, Momochi Zabuza. Kakashi strode forward, hands in pockets. "The copy ninja, Sharingan Kakashi, I'm sorry, but I'll have you hand over the old man." Kitsune could tell, even from his position high up in the trees, Sasuke stiffen and stare at his sensei. Sakura also hesitated, her green eyes reflecting confusion. "Get back, you guys," Kakashi softly intoned, lifting up his hitate. Sasuke's eyes watched, fixated on Kakashi's hand moving the headband upwards. What was revealed was a glaring, blood red, the color of a Sharingan eye. "Get in manji battle formation, you guys. Protect Tazuna, don't involve yourselves in the fight. That is the teamwork in this situation." Sasuke carefully described the Sharingan eye after the Naruto clone demanded to know what it was, trying to buy time for the real Naruto to, well, for whatever he was doing. Zabuza picked up where he left off, while mist streamed in, blanketing the meadow and nearby body of water. "Nothing was visible. When I was in the ANBU Black Ops of the Hidden Mist, there was information about you in the bingo book I carried around. There was also something else in the book, about the man who has copied over 1,000 jutsu, Kakashi the copy ninja." The man stared down at them, his printed forearm and calves coverings loosely disguising just how powerful he was, and his eyes glittering with an insane, fanatical stare. His dark hair moved along gently with the wind, but the rest of him stood stock still, as if carved by stone. Kitsune could tell that Sakura was surprised, wondering if their sensei was really that powerful, and his clone yelled breathlessly, "Wow!" However, Sasuke was not giving the same reaction to this as his teammates. He stared at Kakashi darkly, his mouth pulled into a thin line, wondering why his sensei suddenly possessed a trait only the Uchiha family, his family, should have. Had. They were all dead, now, and Sasuke clenched his teeth at that. All the more reason his supposed teacher was not supposed to possess such a prized jujitsu. The man identified as Zabuza flickered onto the water, one arm raised straight upward and the other held in front of his bare chest, fingers curled except for the first two, and Kakashi noticed he was gathering a large amount of chakra. "Ninja art, hidden misjutsu," he murmured in a deep voice, and faded away. Kakashi warned them to stay on guard, while Sakura's girly voice tried to seek comfort in knowing who he was. The information given only served to scare her even further. A voice echoed around them, listing the 8 different fatal areas he could target, his voice a calm river flowing over them, drowning them. Kakashi released his killing intent and Kitsune could sense more than see Sasuke's immediate paralysis, Sakura's overwhelming fear, and his clone's languid relaxation. Such opposite reactions. Kakashi calmed them down, saying, "Don't worry, you guys. I'll protect you with my life." Right after those words, the man appeared, just like that, separating the group, his feet spread wide apart, and intoned, "This is the end. It's over." Without a thought, Kakashi rushed forward, his corded arm moving forward to send his kunai solidly into Zabuza's stomach, the direct stab inciting a choke sound from the sword master. Team 7 and Tazuna were flung in all directions, left to tumble along the grassy ground as the two powerful shinobi stood stock still. Zabuza melted into water. "Sensei! Behind you!" Sakura screamed, fear laced into her voice. The sharp, steel blade swung at Kakashi, passing directly through his middle, and chopping him into water. The onlookers were breathing hard as if they had been the one in the battle, their hearts having leaped into their throat after seeing their sensei chopped in half. The ragged breaths drawn by Kitsune's clone were, undoubtedly, fake, but if he hadn't had this life and had actually just been Uzumaki Naruto, he definitely would have been doing that just then. His ears pounding with every beat his heart made, blood rushing through his head, he stood up, along with his teammates, ready to make Zabuza think twice, even as Kakashi held a deadly kunai at Zabuza's throat, the sharpened edge glinting. Kakashi then mimicked, "It's over." Zabuza laughed and haughtily told off Kakashi, simultaneously praising his ability to distract him and copy his water clone technique. But, he snarled, "I'm not a fool." He burst into water, and another Zabuza, this time, the real one, appeared behind Kakashi, heat emanating from his body and sending Kakashi's warning signals into a frenzy. His sword poised in the air, the large sword held easily with one hand. Zabuza froze. Kakashi was unable to move, either, and wondered frantically how Zabuza had obtained knowledge about the Leaf's forbidden paralysis technique, a modification of the temporary paralysis jutsu, and created by one of their most talented ANBU members. But, that wasn't it. A small, black-swathed figure leaped down, appearing out of nowhere, and was identified as a Leaf ANBU immediately. Although the figure was small, the ANBU emanated an ominous, fear-inducing aura, his mere presence causing the others to cringe in fear. The pressure lifted, and the genin exhaled shakily. "ANBU?" Sakura questioned, surprised. The small person strode forward confidently, each stride eating up large amounts of earth until he was standing directly in front of the two shinobi locked in battle. "Momochi Zabuza, I believe you have realized just why you should not continue." He paused. "Hello, Kakashi, Kitsune-senpai? What, you're the ANBU the Sandame assigned?" "Wait, what?" Clone Naruto asked. "What's going on?" "Yeah, what's an ANBU doing here?" Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke, Uzumaki Naruto, and Tazuna the bridge builder. "No need to worry. Zabuza owes me a favor," the man just targeted growled. "Kitsune, do not interrupt this one. I am reluctant to say so, but I need the profits right now. Allow me to kill him." But unfortunately, my mission doesn't allow that. I'll be releasing you too, and you better not attack, either of you. Otherwise, Naruto let the threat fade. They both knew what he was capable of. He released the jutsu, and they backed up, facing each other warily. "And Yuki Haku, there's no need to wait in the shadows. A young man, woman?" Sakura and Sasuke questioned this, jumped down, flitting to Zabuza's side quietly. "Wait, senpai. Why does Zabuza owe you a favor?" Zabuza twisted up his mouth, obviously angry that he did. "He spared my life," he growled, and Kakashi started in surprise. "What?" "Kitsune-senpai never spares." "Actually, I did," he said casually, and Kakashi noticed that his voice sounded familiar, and not because he had heard it so many times on or off missions, but because of something else. What was it? He knew he was missing something, and that frustrated him. They were traveling through Fire Country for reasons I still don't know, and a team of ANBU happened upon them. They attacked, realizing he was a missing nin, but then I arrived, dismissed the other ANBU telling them I could handle them, and since they were temporarily without their ANBU captain, I outranked them all, so they had to leave. But after noticing the extreme dedication Haku had towards Zabuza, I suppose out of some sort of goodness in my heart, I held my hand, and spared them, after warning them they should never be caught by ANBU again. Zabuza nodded tersely. Meanwhile, Team 7 was still confused by the sudden change of events, and they wandered closer, Sasuke immediately pointing out, "You're short for an ANBU, and that means you're still a kid. How can you be an ANBU?" The ANBU turned toward him and said in a monotone, "I am 12 years old. I am identified as Kitsune, and you may do whatever research you like once you travel back to Leaf Village." For now, we will leave it there. Clone Naruto stared after his real self in wonder as he walked away, and Kitsune then turned and asked, "Are you coming?" The rest followed, Kakashi bringing up the rear right behind Zabuza and his apprentice, or whatever Haku was, carefully watching for any threatening movements. Somehow, he didn't find any. As they walked, Kitsune asked Tazuna, "Would you be willing to house 2 missing nin that could potentially kill you, but will not, because I am instructing them not to?" When phrased like that, Tazuna shuddered. How could he even trust this stranger? Obviously, the ninja accompanying him did, or at least the leader of the shinobi accompanying him did, but it was still strange. "Who are you? How can I believe that they'll do what you tell them to do?" He chuckled. You should ask Kakashi that." Tazuna glanced behind himself nervously. The 2 hired shinobi stared at him, eyes cold and hard and causing him to gulp. Could you just explain?" Well, I am Kakashi's superior. You could say. Kakashi retired from being an ANBU a couple months ago to teach fresh out of the academy genin. Why, I still am not sure, but he has been serving in ANBU for a long time. Anyway, he was on my team for a while, so I am familiar with him, and he familiar with me. If you don't trust me, trust him, at least, or trust the kids, which, ultimately, in a roundabout way, still leads to trusting me. I will handle Zabuza and his apprentice. He grunted, still scared to death about allowing this Zabuza and Haku into his house, into his home, where they could harm Inari and Tsunami, where they could kill any of them in their sleep. No. He couldn't let that happen. I can't let you do that. I'll kill you before that happens. The unmasked shinobi, the porcelain mask was now hanging at his hip, although a cloth mask still obscured the bottom half of his face, quirked up an eyebrow, pale skin wrinkling on his forehead under the cover of dark hair. Well, probably not. But I'll try, you know. You don't have to if you don't want to, although if I were to let them do as they please, they may or may not come at any random time and kill you whenever they want, however they want. Or they could repay a favor to me and, because this favor they are paying is helping you, stay at your house until some things are solved. Well, the feeling the boy was emanating was not pretty. It was a frightening feeling, something that the boy exuded with his smooth, controlled gait, a type of confidence you could only find in the highest and the strongest shinobi of the countries. He gulped. Yeah, I'll allow 2 criminals into my house. But you better be watching them. They better not kill me or my family while we're sleeping. The small ANBU chuckled dryly. Of course. We arrived at Tazuna's house in a couple minutes, and I had Zabuza and Haku wait outside in the yard for a moment, while the rest of them went inside. I could tell Kakashi was not looking forward to discussing his Sharingan with Sasuke, which would happen sometime, sooner or later. Probably sooner. Sakura was watching me with some fascination and fear, looking fearful of the fact that an ANBU had come with them, meaning this mission was much more dangerous than they had thought, but also fascinated most likely because I had stopped Kakashi and Zabuza so easily. 2 A-ranked, close to S-ranked shinobi had been stopped by 1 ANBU. My overabundance of chakra was the main factor in allowing that display of power to happen. Well, Kitsune, what do you want? Zabuza drawled, leaning against a tree. We were in the forest, in a secluded area, and we had all checked for any eavesdroppers. None. Our conversation was safe from being overheard. Have you ever thought about killing Gatu? Then you could actually do the world some good, and the land of the waves would be forever grateful to you that you saved them from such a tyrant. He shrugged, his massive shoulders heaving up, then down. I suppose I haven't ever thought about that, but what would I gain? Nothing. And my goal is to eventually overthrow the Land of Water's government. I have no need to become involved with Land of Waves. Wave is as good as any place to start, though. It's a small piece of land surrounded by water, and although water is nowhere near being considered small, it's still a piece of land surrounded by bodies of water. And anyway, you could do whatever you wanted to with waves, provided you don't bring its destruction or starvation, like Gato has done. Also, all of Gato's money left behind would not be paid to his other hired bodyguards, but taken by us, split between the Leaf and you both. It wouldn't be taken away by the government, or given to a successor, because it's all illegal. It's all from selling drugs and other such illegal things. What do you say? Haku spoke up. I think it is a good idea, Master. Why not? Obviously this money's useful, and, under the possibility that Kitsune-kun will gain the citizens' favor and say that we defeated Gatu, we could maybe even start training our own shinobi from Wave, and potentially become a small ally to Water Country, but an ally all the same, and you might even be allowed to return peacefully. From there we could actually make plans. I nodded, satisfied. If Haku supported it, then Zabuza would at least give it some actual consideration. Zabuza scowled. We'll see, he finally forced out, and strode back to Tazuna's house. I knocked, and a moment later Tsunami, Tazuna's daughter, answered the door, recognized me, with my black hair, gray eyes, and pale skin and, of course, the ANBU mask hanging on my hip, and called inside. A moment later, Kakashi and Tazuna came, glancing at the two ex-enemies with apprehension. They stood there awkwardly, until I gestured for them to come and said, Tsunami, your father has already agreed to allow these two Nukenin to stay here for a couple nights, and if you have any questions or concerns, ask him. They will not disturb you in any way, and I'm sure they can acquire their own meals. Although, you know, everybody appreciates homemade meals once in a while. Zabuza appeared stricken, and for the first time, looked embarrassed. He walked inside stiffly, and Kakashi followed the two upstairs. He glanced back at me, gave me a meaningful look, and then continued on his way. Well, I said brightly, thanks for letting us staying. Although I won't, I added. Why not? Tsunami appeared concerned, and I smiled slightly. I have a lot of work to do, was all I gave as an excuse before heading upstairs. I just need to talk with my fellow shinobi for a moment, and then I'll be on my way. I maneuvered my way through the halls, finally coming upon the room Team 7 was gathered in. Kakashi was probably reviewing the fighting tactics they had done, and congratulating them, or whatever. I opened the door at the speed of a normal person, not too fast, such as when trying to ambush whoever was inside, or not too slow, when hoping to enter a room soundlessly or avoid any traps, and the people inside whipped their heads around to face me. They relaxed marginally when they realized it was me, and resumed their relaxed positions on the floor. Sasuke wondered at how similar the ANBU looked like him, the only difference being that the boy's eyes were lighter. Even the facial features, face shape, cheekbone height, chin shape, were similar. Well, as much as he could tell with that mask on anyway. He narrowed his eyes. Something was really off about all of this, besides the fact that someone his age could subdue his sensei and a missing nin together. Kitsune, I'd like to talk to you, Kakashi said, standing up. The preteen shrugged. Sure. They walked outside, closing the door, and the remainders of Team 7 inside the room immediately huddled together. Don't you guys think something's weird about him? Naruto unwittingly voiced Sasuke's thoughts. Sasuke nodded, for once agreeing with the dobe. Yeah, and Kakashi wanted to talk to him, and was all secretive. What if we go see what's going on? Sakura said excitedly, but Naruto, for some strange reason, shook his head. I thought you liked doing these kind of things, Sasuke accused, and Naruto looked genuinely worried for a moment before leaning back and crossing his arms, saying that they looked pretty serious. What if it was something confidential? Sakura bit her lip, annoyed and afraid that it could be. But then Sasuke, of all people, said, I want to find out more about this guy. He stood up, staring at them for a moment, and when Sakura hesitated and Naruto scrunched up his face, he smirked and taunted, What, too scared, scaredy cats? The 12-year-old then quickly scampered out the door, making sure to lighten his footsteps with chakra. Itachi had taught him that, one of the few things that man actually had done for him. It left a bitter feeling in his chest, coupled with that tiny pinch of pride from knowing he was probably the only one of his graduating class to know how to lighten sounds like that. As he stalked towards the end of the hallway, they had luckily been situated in the last room on the right. He passed by the two missing nin's room, and was tempted to spy on them instead and make sure they weren't planning anything. Their mission had been to keep Tazuna-san safe, and he wasn't going to fail now even with an ANBU letting them stay. Taking long strides, he soon reached the last door on the left, pressing his ear against the door crack and focusing. Mission is really that dangerous? I mean, you, the ANBU commander of all people, are coming on this mission with us. Is there something else going on here, or? Sasuke backed up. The ANBU commander? That was the highest positioned ANBU there could be, pretty much second or third in line from the Hokage's position. Why would the ANBU commander be coming along? He pressed his ear to the door again. Silence. He pressed harder, straining to hear something, but then there was suddenly air whooshing against his ear and hands, and he stumbled forward a couple steps before catching himself and settling into a defensive position. And then he scowled. The kid, the ANBU commander, was standing right in front, arms crossed and eyebrows raised. It was strange, kind of like looking in a mirror, and then seeing a different expression from the one you were currently wearing. Someone cleared his throat from behind him, and he turned and saw Kakashi still holding the doorknob, peering out into the hallway at two stricken faces. Well, apparently Naruto and Sakura had still decided to come after all. Well, Kitsune-senpai was right. You three were trying too. It was just me. I wanted to find out what was up with you. You look a lot like me, and you just act weird, so I decided to come and see what I could find out. For all I know, you could be an enemy. For a moment, there was just the smallest flicker of surprise before Kitsune's face went blank again. Well, apparently I should have left my mask on after all, he murmured. Sasuke. Trust me. He's definitely Konoha's ANBU. I personally know him. What if he's not? You can't ever be sure. There was an awkward pause. I know he's my captain. I'm familiar with him. Besides, I already received confirmation. Anyway, I suppose you three should know. Kitsune? I've been following your team ever since you all left Konoha. I was hiding my chakra signature, as I always do that no matter where I am, and well, this mission is more dangerous than you think. Kakashi, the snake seems to be on the move, you've heard, right? Kakashi nodded quickly, and Sasuke looked at the both of them suspiciously. Sakura and Naruto appeared just as confused as him. The snake's coming. I have to watch for him. He's planning something as usual, but this time, it's definitely involving Leaf on a larger, more troublesome scale. Okay, this guy was seriously speaking in some kind of code that he didn't know, and that frustrated him. That still doesn't prove you're trustworthy, Sasuke growled. The ANBU seemed to show frustration for once. He silently removed his outer jacket, and then pointed at his left shoulder. There it was, the ANBU tattoo that Sasuke recognized oh so very well, besides the fact that it included extra parts indicating he was the commander. Itachi had one, and he had been fascinated with it, examining every inch of the tattoo. He hated himself for adoring Itachi once. He would get his revenge on him, no matter what it took. He then released the pressure on his chakra, and it flowed out, stunning the genin for a moment. It was powerful, very powerful, and the dark-haired genin supposed he was purposefully doing that, scaring the crap out of them, that is. He could admit that, begrudgingly. Well, the small figure said as he rolled his sleeve back down. I hope that clarifies things, Sasuke-san. You doubted the validity of me as an ANBU as well as the validity of me being a Leaf Shinobi, but I should have cleared that up with what I just showed you. An almost imperceptible bend of his knees. I'll be going now. He hopped out the window, his black clothing slowly fading into the darkening environment. I think it's time for dinner, everyone. And the two missing Nin, I'm sorry I don't know your names, would you please join us too? Kakashi scratched his hair. I suppose we should go down then. There's sushi, fried rice, and my specialty, seaweed strips with spice, among other dishes. Help yourselves. Thank you, Tsunami-san. My master and I appreciate your kindness. Haku murmurs this as they pile their plates with only the necessary amounts of food to stay healthy and then quietly slip out the door. Hey, where are you going? Tazuna barks after them, but they've already left. Don't worry, they're up on the roof. I can sense their chakra. Kakashi seems to smile, his visible eye crinkling up. As they sit down, clone Naruto can't help but notice the quiet boy sitting in his chair. He assumes he's Inari, Tazuna's grandson and Tsunami's son because the old man had mentioned the child earlier. The young boy Inari stares out the door with a strange look on his face, and scowls. There's a dark look on his face, at least as dark a look an 8-year-old can muster, and he picks at his food while the Naruto clone, Sakura, Sasuke, and Kakashi chat happily, their mouths full of his mother's food. He suddenly speaks up. Mom, these guys will die, there's no way they can oppose Gato and still win. Say what, you little brat? Clone Naruto stabs a finger at him. Now listen up. I'm a superhero who's gonna become an awesome ninja and become the Hokage. I don't know if it's Gato or chocolate, or whatever, I'm not worried about those guys at all. A hero. That's ridiculous. There's no such thing as a hero. Inari tilts his head downward, a shadow darkening his eyes. What did you say? Stop that. Sakura grabs Naruto's clone before he can pound Inari into the ground. If you don't want to die, you'd better hurry up and go home. He stands up from his place at the dinner table, and shuffles towards the sliding door, sliding it open and stepping out. Inari, where are you going? Tazuna asks forlornly. The sea, I'll be looking at the sea, he replies, and closes the door. I'll apologize on his behalf for the rude behavior, Tazuna sighs, telling this to the shinobi sitting there, staring at the door where Inari has left. After dinner, Naruto stomps up the stairs to where he knows Inari is currently at. That brat, he growls, I need to teach him a thing or two, but as he peers inside the room, he can hear sniffles and crackly voices. Is he crying? Naruto's clone murmurs to himself, watching him. His anger abruptly leaves him as he listens and hears Inari sob, choking out a dad, and Naruto can't help but feel downcast. The next morning, I went with my team to a small clearing to start training. The previous night, I'd snuck into the open window my clone had propped open, and immediately released the pressure I had on my chakra just as my clone popped himself. That way, they would not notice I had been gone. There would have been a constant stream of just Naruto's chakra. I didn't need to eat dinner. I had gained the energy my clone had gotten from his dinner when he popped himself. Just like information my clones gathered would be sent to me, the energy they gained from food they ate would also be given to me. After all, the whole purpose of eating is just to take the energy from all the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins and use it. Now that I already had the energy, I didn't need the food. The memories my shadow clone also transferred told me some curious things about Inari, and I felt my curiosity grow as I thought about it. Obviously his father died, was killed or was somehow gone now, but how? It had something to do with that not a hero tidbit he had said earlier to my team, I was sure. Right afterwards, he was crying over his father. There was definitely a correlation here, but I digress. Currently, Kakashi was explaining what our training exercise would be. I had been super excited about it when he had mentioned it to me after I stumbled down the stairs for breakfast. He was sipping coffee behind a newspaper, and when I had gone to shake Sakura and Sasuke awake so we could hurry and start training, Sakura had shooed me away blearily, telling me she'd get up after I left, and Sasuke had reacted in an eerily similar way after he had pressed the kunai to my neck. It had taken all the control I had to restrain myself from reaching up with my hand and crushing the still-moving fist, yanking it, and pulling his shoulder out of the socket, then jabbing the kunai at his own neck. Instead, all I did was turn my upward movement into an I'm innocent gesture, palms up while I rocked back onto my heels. Sakura still looked miffed that she hadn't been able to get her beauty sleep, but Sasuke's eyes were conveying the impatience he felt but didn't express. I turned my attention back to Kakashi. Hey, Kakashi-sensei, do you know where the two missing nin went? Sakura interrupted him, her green eyes actually looking genuinely curious about this. They have names, you know, I said absent-mindedly, subtly touching the ground to sense for them by pretending to trip over thin air. They weren't around for at least 50 kilometers. The three people standing with me in the clearing looked at me strangely. Okay, Naruto, well I just forgot them. Zabuza and Haku. Okay, Zabuza and Haku. Awkward silence. Whatever, I didn't care. Well, I did. Why else would I be fretting about my identity being discovered so much? This would be a pretty big clue as to who I really was. But I liked those two well enough. Well enough so that I cared they weren't only regarded as monsters. Well anyway, Kakashi-sensei, do you know where they are? No, he shook his head. I don't know about those two. Remember, the ANBU is taking care of them. His eyes narrowed. Speaking of which, I have a couple of questions for him. We didn't get to finish our discussion yesterday, due to someone interrupting. The corners of Sasuke's mouth curled up involuntarily. So before we start, let me again explain chakra usage for a ninja, from the basics. At this point, Sasuke sighed. Of course we know about that. Chatora, right? I was trying to dumb myself down in their eyes, but maybe it was a little much. They stared at me like I was crazy, and then Kakashi reprimanded gruffly, it's chakra. I gave the most embarrassed look I could muster. Kakashi noticed Sakura staring at me with impatience, so he gestured at her and said, yes, Sakura? She described it as physical and spiritual energy combined together to allow us to gather it, and then dispel it into something else. I listened, nodded, and then he finally gave us a demonstration, first describing the exercise itself. You're going to be climbing trees. That's way too easy, without using your hands. Tree climbing, to help our chakra control. Well, Sakura would get this easily enough. She had great chakra control, one of the few things that she could actually be considered good at. Now watch, Kakashi commanded, and he closed his eyes just to prove to us that this needed concentration. You could almost visibly see the blue chakra settling around his feet. As Kakashi walked toward one of the sturdy trees, he incited gasps from us as he put one foot on the rough bark, and then the other. And then he walked up the tree as if it was just part of the ground. Whoa! Cool! I shouted, and he instructed us how to do this while hanging upside down from a branch. I had a plan. I immediately put my foot on a tree, sending a large amount of chakra to my feet, which caused me to bounce back as if I had sprung off a trampoline. I flew backwards, made two clones, and substituted my actual self with a bird sitting high up in the dense branches. One of the clones allowed the other clone to hit it, causing the first to poof away, making it seem as if the real me had only created one clone to soften my landing. The bird suddenly found itself sitting on the ground very near human beings, and it flew away with a shriek. I shed the orange monstrosity, sealed it away, and watched my team for a couple moments longer as Sakura found her way onto the nearest branch. Sasuke bounced off his tree again while marking his progress with a slash of a kunai, and Kakashi helpfully pointed out to me that I had used far too much chakra. Yeah, I know, my clone growled, and Kakashi pulled out his book. I took that as a signal to get going on my mission. I dashed towards civilization, sensing Zabuza and Haku nearby currently assassinating a very important boss of the Gato Company, and headed towards a nearby bar with a henge of a random fisherman. I sauntered inside, faking fatigue. "Your strongest sake," I muttered, collapsing on a stool and placing my forearms on the counter. "What's got you so tired?" A couple fellow fishermen moved to sit next to me. "There's none of those flippin' fish. All my traps bein' ruined by those bridge builders." They nodded wisely, and then a jug of sake appeared in my line of vision. "Here, y'all," I muttered, swinging the jug towards them and splashing some into their cups. They drank it greedily, and one of them laughed. "You better have money fair that thing's expensive." I just rolled my eyes and poured myself a good amount, taking only a small sip and allowing the rest to be poured back into the bottle. It was a nice trick, holding the cup at your mouth while swinging the sake bottle around, having it end up right underneath your cup. I held it close, but fortunately they weren't paying attention anyway, and there weren't any of those pesky bodyguards, bouncers or such that would be paying close attention to everybody. I had gone around town yesterday, purposely seeking out the bad side of town and looking around for those places that spread all kinds of news and gossip all the time. This was one of the bars that fishermen and other people with similar or related occupations spend most of their time at, and I studied their mannerisms, accents, and topics they liked discussing for a couple of hours before leaving. This was why I knew that their traps were often being removed by the bridge builders, because supplies needed to be hauled along and the whole setup of the bridge needed to be well set up. "Hey," I faked a slur. "Anybody hear of anything strange happening lately?" "Whatcha mean?" "I've been hearing that there's these weird fish swimming around and being caught by us, and they start biting you like a dog." One of them slammed me on the back. "That's old news, you senile old man." Okay, so I didn't really like being called a senile old man. I was a kid, for God's sake, I guffawed. "You know me, always traveling everywhere. Don't catch up on much news these days, no?" I was hoping they'd be so drunk in their stupor they wouldn't realize they hadn't actually known me before this, and wouldn't ever again, and luckily, they were just that drunk. "Yeah, I hear about it. Couple years ago, these weird fish peered and bit through our nets and everything. It was weird. It didn't swim real well either, had fur-like stuff on its back and moved slowly, but, well, really weird. Didn't do any good for us fishermen either. But then a couple of months ago, there were more of these guys, except they had less fur, and could swim faster than before. There were also these mutant crabs and lobsters, and nobody bought 'em when we got the rare chance to catch and kill 'em," another fisher drawled, a little anger appearing in his features at the mention of it. "Man, I was mad. Took so long to catch 'em, but still couldn't sell them. They eventually died out again, though, and I decided to fish somewhere else too. This was finally going somewhere. I knew Orochimaru had a base somewhere here before, but there had not been many investigations about this one since there were only a couple reports about it before he apparently left again. I had to bring that previous incident up, and then have it slowly guided to the right topic, but they did that for themselves and I would hopefully be able to figure out about where the base was from their loose lips. Yeah, taking advantage of common people, what Shinobi did all the time. "Where'd you move to?" "Ha, as if I'm gonna tell you that. You're not going to steal all my fish." Come on, we're fellow fishermen. At least tell me what area I should stay away from." Alright, stay away from Blue Cove, you know, that area where there's like tons of trees and rocks. But once you get there used to be tons of good fish. Stay away from there. Got the most mutant fish there. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for helping me." I poured the rest of the sake into their cups, poured the tiniest leftover bit into my cup as well, and downed it. If I even got drunk from that tiny bit, the QB would burn it all out of my system before I could even take a tipsy step forward. Just to show how gracious I was being today, I paid for that expensive bottle, and added a tip. My fellow fishermen ogled at the money, and then each had to slap me on the back again, grinning and showing their thanks. I stood up sloppily, told them I had to go, and stumbled outside, stumbling away into a quieter, less populated area before using Shanshin to travel to Blue Cove. It was in the northeast area, facing the wide ocean, and happened to have a very unshallow drop from the shore. There was no gradual slope downward, just a sharp drop down into the water, where it'd be perfect to set up a base right next to the edge of the island and experiment without any fear of discovery. Perfect for Orochimaru, and perfect for me to figure out how to gain access to it, and find any clues about what he'd be doing to Konoha. I just have to figure out exactly how to get there. Now, this was taking forever. First of all, there were a bunch of snakes around here, and so the smell of them was messing with my sense of smell. I'd thought I could sniff out that slippery bastard's entrance. I was pretty sure he wouldn't just dive straight into the water and swim all the way down there, but apparently not. Second of all, I was bad with genjutsu. Sure, my genjutsu skills could be ranked as B rank, but compared to S rank in ninjutsu and fuinjutsu, and A rank in taijutsu and kenjutsu, it was pretty bad. Orochimaru was all about illusions and deception anyway, so it made sense to me that he'd be good at genjutsu and hide his entrance. And then third of all, okay, so I had no third of all. And that was embarrassing, to say the least. I should have more complications than that in order to stop me. Only two little things preventing me for hours of accessing Orochimaru's base, and so maybe it had only been 30 minutes, but if I was on a mission to infiltrate a heavily guarded enemy base, I would have totally been caught by now. Or maybe not. Either way, guards or not, I wasn't getting in. Erg. I punched a tree in frustration, and watched in satisfaction as a large crack spread up and down the tree, the splitting of dry wood making a resounding crhhh as the tree practically split in half. It hit the ground, bounced a little, and I almost expected something to happen. Like, you know, in one of those movies where the detective's searching forever, and acting out of anger or doing something else other than searching, and then suddenly they discover what they're looking for. Like, bam, it's just right there. They spent no effort at all finding it, and spent tons of effort previously trying to find it. Well, anyway. I rubbed my eyes and continued on. Once I reached a hazy, foggy area for the 120th time, I tried dispelling a genjutsu. I felt slightly confused and foggy here, or maybe that was just from the humidity. Either way, something seemed to happen this time. There was a pop, and I almost jumped back in fright when my vision went double and then cleared too. There was nothing but spiders right in front of my nose. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not afraid of spiders. Why would I be? I'm a shinobi, I'm not afraid of anything. I stepped back fluidly. I didn't jump, I really didn't scramble backwards, practically tripping over my feet. I examined what was in front of me, and I realized the genjutsu made me swerve around this structure even if I thought I was heading straight. The mound of rock I had found those little arachnids crouched upon seemed to be a shinobi-made structure that Orochimaru had discovered and decided to use. It could have been from a battle, from a long-lost civilization, anything, really. The point was, his genjutsu was strong. At least I hoped so. I didn't need my pride ruined any further. I walked around it, and realized there was a small hole, large enough for an adult to crawl into, set right at the base of it facing the ocean. I took my chances, crawled inside, and suddenly things were dark and I had that jolting sensation of free-falling, where your internal organs just move, your hair is flying straight up, your breath is ripped away. I steadied myself with chakra onto the wall after making sure there weren't any spiders or seals there. After sliding a couple yards, I finally skidded to a stop, and jogged the rest of the way down, checking the floor, walls and ceiling for any traps and skittering past them. Clone Naruto and Sasuke continuously competed, the rivalry between them growing ever the larger. Sakura was far too tired to continue. Her chakra reserves were long depleted and her physical energy long gone as well. It was amazing how the boys could have so much stamina, and especially Naruto, she could admit reluctantly. It was really disappointing. She had, although with slight difficulties in the beginning, climbed high up, found it quite easy, and then looked over at Sasuke-kun only to see that he was still struggling. At the slightly jealous and angry look shot at her, her triumphant grin had melted and her mood plummeted. Naruto tossed over a good job, and Kakashi gave her one of his trademark weird U-shaped eye smile, before telling her to work on increasing her chakra reserves. The boys needed chakra control, she needed chakra reserves. They needed to share skills/assets. Alas, it wasn't as easy as, say, sharing different fruits among each other. It wasn't fair. How come Sasuke was so interested in competing with Naruto, while only directing nasty looks at her? And then she realized she was feeling jealous of Naruto, and she promptly sat up, shook her head, and proceeded to run over to the sweating idiots, her teammates, and brightly share a couple tips. Naruto thanked her, Sasuke grunted in annoyance, and they both ran up their battered trees again. Why wouldn't they ever include her? Why was she the one always left out? And that was what she was thinking was truly unfair, Sakura realized. It wasn't only Sasuke's attention she wanted, it was the two boys' acceptance she needed. Kakashi somehow noticed how melancholy she was feeling, and smiled at her. At least, his eye crinkled up and his cloth mask stretched into a different shape. Sakura, keep working on building up your chakra reserves. You might not catch up to these two powerhouses on your team, but you definitely match many others in your academy class, and even blow past them, if you work that little bit harder. She nodded obediently. But she couldn't help but glance over at Sasuke-kun and Naruto again. her sharp eyes pinpointing the competitive smirk on Sasuke's face and the full-blown grin stretched out on Naruto's face. They were happy, competing against each other. She wasn't. It definitely hadn't been easy, he could say. He let out the breath he'd been holding and shook his head gently, careful not to let drops of water that had started beading on his skin from the moisture in the air fling onto precious documents. All right. Now down to business. Even down here, his henge into the Sasuke look-alike was held in place, in case Orochimaru had some sort of security that could notify him of Kitsune's other identity. The air was stale down here, but he could put energy into it and send it flying, which was essentially creating his own personalized wind. A slight beckon caused the drawer to slide open silently, and he clumsily rifled through the thick jungle of folders. The human hand's abilities were too complicated to copy completely, until he realized everything was in code. Seriously? He didn't think it would take too much time decoding it, however, because it didn't seem realistic that Orochimaru would waste that much time creating one when there was already enough security for this unimportant base. Eventually, Kitsune reached a paper where it mentioned Konoha and found a couple of diagrams hidden beneath a genjutsu. And that's when something went wrong. No, not for him. Not for Kitsune. He was currently being very careful, except something didn't feel right. Something that he sensed throughout his entire being, and he carefully made a clone, handed the paper to it, and left without a word, still trying to replace the space he previously occupied as he ran across the surface of the ground. Having given up after numerous attempts to interact with her teammates, Sakura left, wandering around town, and only glancing up when she heard the faint sound of a muffled scream. Everybody else continued to scurry quietly around, paying attention only to their current task and indicating they hadn't heard it. Well, she was a shinobi, and she congratulated herself on subconsciously keeping all her senses on alert before discreetly stepping off to the side and then employing her new skill. Her feet touched the side of the building, and then she was suddenly running sideways, the world turned and gravity still trying to pull on her backside. Attempting to concentrate on where she had heard it, Sakura closed her eyes, slowed down, and focused. And then there was suddenly a splintering sound of glass shattering right above her, and she instinctively squeezed shut her eyes tighter, bent down and rolled, still sticking to the side of the building but rolling off to the side to avoid the sharp fragments, aiming straight at her. Some of the smaller pieces still hit her, and she squeaked, cuts forming on her arms and legs and face, frightened. What was going on? Sakura stayed crouched on the side of the building for a while, until her legs reminded her that she had quit training for the time being for a reason, and she carefully stepped closer to the shattered window, almost all of the glass blown out with a tremendous force. Peered inside. Widened her eyes. Gasped. That small sound alerted one of the two people closest to her that she was there, and Naruto shooed her away frantically. Completely baffled but annoyed by Naruto's actions, she swung herself inside, crying out when her hand was stabbed with a leftover glass shard still clinging onto the window. Damn it, Naruto muttered, and now that she noticed, stood up from where he was crouched over. Haku, wasn't it, stepping over the prone body and yanking Sakura's hand away from her chest where she was clutching it in pain. His hand, still covered in the slippery substance of blood, gripped her wrist tightly, and the other, covered in even more of the violent maroon liquid, if that was possible, was quickly wiped on his ANBU clothing. Naruto then reached forward and pressed against her cut, green light flowing out of his hand and closing her wound. White-hot pain zipped up from her palm all the way to her shoulder, and Sakura sucked in a breath, teeth clenched and hand frozen with agony. It felt raw and sharp, jagged, without the smooth, calm warmth that she remembered receiving from a nurse once when she had broken her arm in the ninja academy while training. That had been very painful to say the least, and she'd wished to never experience a broken bone again until the nurse had healed the majority of her leg, and it had suddenly been enveloped in a pleasantly numbing sensation, filled with warmth and a feeling similar to the comfort of her mother's soothing hand. Now, though, with Naruto here, pushing the harsh green glow into her slowly healing cut, she wondered if that was only her imagination, imagining the warmth from the nurse's healing. However, Naruto clarified it, saying, "I'm not good with medical jutsu. I can only do basic healing, mending, stitching, and it's difficult for me anyway, so it'll feel more painful than a regular doctor. Your hand should be fine, though. Stay away from that area with Zabuza. He and Haku were attempting to kill Gato. You should know that, by the way. But for some reason Gato had 5 more unexpected and hired missing nin. Haku saved Zabuza earlier from them because they caught the 2 of them off guard, and they're pretty fast. They have good teamwork, and they're quick, as I said, so even though he's the demon of the mist, it's going to be harder than usual. I already sent a clone to Kakashi, and he should be on his way. Stay out of this fight." This was quickly rushed out in a span of about 20 seconds, but amazingly, Naruto was keeping his voice level and loud, and words were still enunciated clearly for her to understand. It almost sounded like he was briefing her on the current state of the mission, and now that he had given orders, she needed to do her part, which was to stay out of this fight. And then her brain finally caught up with everything now that there was no pain in her hand and she was relatively calmer, and something strange was happening. Her mind struggled to equate loud, brash and dumb Naruto with the young man in front of her, frantically trying to save an acquaintance's life. Naruto, what are you doing? How do you know medical jutsu? How did you get here? Why are you so, Haruno-san? If you were a teammate of mine, I would tell you to distract a missing nin away from Zabuza, because he's currently fighting a losing battle. Or I would tell you to kill Gato, who's trapped in the corner right now, the fat guy practically pissing his pants and waving his arms around trying to get his hired bodyguards to let him out of the room. But I don't think you know much about assassination or simply fighting high-level shinobi. You're not on the level, at all, of any of them, and it would be easier to not have to worry about your safety as well when Kakashi and I are battling any of them. She shut up after that, realizing Zabuza was slowly being backed away, closer and closer towards Naruto and Haku, and Gato was finally able to escape. Stop right there! Sakura screeched, racing to get between him and the doorway. Ah! Gato jiggled his chin and cheeks, and then continued to jiggle the rest of his body as he scuttled out the door. Sakura was faster though, and she reached the doorway as he was still turning the corner into another hallway, tumbling over a slain bodyguard, one of the pathetic samurai, and getting his own limbs tangled. Unfortunately, just as she reached him and apprehension filled her as to what she was supposed to do, Gato wriggled free and raced down the hallway again. Stop! Acting completely on instinct, Sakura bent her knees slightly, creating tension in her quadriceps, gluteal, and calf muscles, before springing off her feet, soaring into the air and crashing on top of the fat man, the breath knocked out of her even with such a large cushion. Stop moving, or else I'm going to, kill you! Sakura pulled out a kunai and held it at his neck, desperately hoping he didn't feel the tremor in her hand or discern her hesitation as bluffing. Her hand tilted the blade at just the right angle to cleanly slice through the major artery, the knowledge stored inside her brain somewhere and finally being put to use. Now, the pink-haired kunoichi slowly clambered off his back and continued to press the kunai at his neck. You are going to stand up and show me where you keep all your important files, money, and whatever. Remember, Zabuza and Haku already killed all of your other guards, and they're fighting the last 5 right now. So you can't run away, or else I'm really going to kill you. She sincerely hoped that that was true. Her previous statement, of course. If any of the guards were left, even one, she'd probably run away screaming and completely fill his expectation of her. A weak, pathetic little girl trying to play ninja. And she didn't think she'd be able to kill him, probably knock him unconscious. But her breath was already coming in short gasps as she attempted to keep herself steady. Sakura swallowed, adrenaline keeping her body thrumming with tension. She'd probably collapse after all of this was over, if she could even last this long. Gato did as he was told, his eyes shining with a crazed and fearful look. The rosette had certainly surprised him, but she was still a little girl. She did not have the confident, strong stance of a powerful kunoichi, and maybe if he was able to guide her into a room with large and plentiful windows, he could surprise her and push her through one. That'd definitely get rid of her, but what if her teammates came after him for that? He'd just blame it on his hired missing nin. Yeah. That would work. It's this way, Gato made sure to stutter, trying to appear afraid of her. It seemed to fool the 12-year-old, and he smirked inwardly. What an oblivious little girl. Move, she commanded him, and he obeyed meekly but briskly, stumbling into a room that contained furniture, appearing to hold precious documents. Instead, it held only stale, musty air, but she didn't need to know that. She'd be falling out of a window instead. They're in there, he mumbled, pointing at them, and she beckoned him forward, a wary look in her eyes. The kunoichi wouldn't be falling for that, although he hadn't expected her to. Gato walked forward again, hand reaching down before a pale, strong hand gripped his forearm. Actually, I'll look. You stand there. Don't go anywhere. If you so much as twitch, I'll have to restrain you. He nodded, all the while laughing his head off inside. Perfect. She had positioned herself against the wall, or rather, the window, thinking she'd have herself safely backed up by the window and wall, glancing between Gato on her left and the drawer handles. Just as her hand latched onto the knob and began sliding out the drawer, Gato slammed into her, knocking her completely off balance and pushing her straight towards the window. Unfortunately, he only rammed her into the glass, where cracks spidered out, and she straightened up after letting out a cry. now frightened. Gato prepared for another slam, until realizing her kunai was already at his neck. Again, he growled, this time knowing he had not much of a chance. Or did he? She didn't seem able to go through with the motion. She might cut him, but as long as he was quick, he could reach the window and push her fragile little body through it. He quickly backed up, ducking his head down while turning it away, and she hesitated, her hand gripping the kunai so tightly her knuckles turned white. She couldn't stab him. Her hand shook, and Gato chuckled humorlessly, before propelling himself forward and roughly pushing her aside, pulling open the window and grabbing a fistful of her hair to pull her back. She shrieked, but the man had no sympathy. Once she was in front of the window, a meaty hand on her wrist to keep the kunai pointed away from him. The other let go of her beautiful rosy hair, and he bodily slammed her through the delicate screen. Her knees attempted to hook onto the windowsill before the rest of her body slammed against the wall, and the breath was knocked out of her, head throbbing and bruised. That caused her to let go, and rational thought left her as she plummeted. She wasn't close enough to the wall to stick to it with chakra, and even if she was, it'd be near impossible to stick to it going at her current speed, and with her current ability. She had just learned this technique, for God's sake. It was a miracle she had even been able to climb up the wall, and roll along it in the first place. Sakura let out a piercing wail, certain she was falling to her death. She'd never have the chance to talk to her family, her team, and her friends ever again, never do anything ever again, because she'd be dead. With that morbid thought, she cut herself off, unwilling to die in such an embarrassing, weak way. She'd only seemed stupid screaming all the way down, although falling to her death seemed to be a good enough justification. Oh, she was going to die anyway. Why not let it all out? She wasn't Sasuke, she wasn't stoic and unmoving, she wasn't Naruto, with a seemingly bottomless pit of bravado, trying to act cool. She was Sakura. And she was going to scream. Just as she opened her mouth again, vocal cords preparing to start up, a black-clothed, lithe figure shot out the broken window above her, turning him or herself vertically and plummeting towards her. The person immediately caught up to her, appearing to be balancing on the air itself, before gently catching her, in the middle of plummeting to her death, too, and planting his or her feet on the wall, almost gliding for a little bit before slowing down. She stared up at blonde, spiky hair, tan skin, and an ANBU tattoo? The commander tattoo as well. What? Her mind jumbled and confused. She could only stare as he turned warm blue eyes to her, and asked if she could stand. On the wall, of course. Sakura applied chakra to her feet again, that same, strained feeling coming back. Ow. She was tired, but there was still a job to be done. What, Naruto? Is that you? The warmth in the boy's eyes faded a little, mouth pressed into a grim line. Like I said earlier, questions later. Boss sent a clone after you, ran after Gato to make sure nothing happened, and that clone created another clone, me, after Gato pushed you out the window. Come on, we're not going to be sticking to the wall all day. I can tell you're tired. The ANBU gently nudged her forwards, or upwards, and she stepped towards the window again, limbs heavy. By the time she clambered back in, Gato was efficiently stabbed through the heart, the clone and his kunai with the blood on it gone, and the blonde stepped in after her, smoothly swinging in and pressing her down. Belatedly, Sakura realized he was trying to get her to sit on the ground, and she sank, knees wobbly and hands shaking. She looked up towards the ANBU, and started. Sasuke? No, not Sasuke, but he looked like the ANBU Kakashi had been talking with before, the one who said he had come along on the mission to, apparently, watch the snake. Whatever that meant, she still didn't understand. I thought, Sakura pressed her palms to her face, rubbing her forehead tiredly. Had she imagined Naruto? That was just, Harino-san. The monotone of his voice commanded her to look at him again, and he asked her if she had any injuries, a roll of bandages loosely held in one hand. She shook her head no, knowing injuries meant actually serious ones. She only had a couple of scratches on her skin, ones that would heal pretty quickly without much guidance. All right. Then I'll be going. Boss needs as much chakra as possible, even though he's a powerhouse after creating hundreds of clones anyway. The clone poofed away, smoke clouding the air, and Sakura was left alone in the room with a prostrate body laying directly in front of her, cold blood and cold skin chilling the dark room. I ducked, the Nukanen's blade slashing a couple inches above my head, but even as his arm swung over, I was positioning myself to aim a kick at his jaw. I shot up from the ground with chakra, glancing off his cheek and fisting my hand into his hair as I passed over his head. The rough, coarse texture allowed for a pretty stable grip, so I was able to yank him backwards and onto the ground, pulling my left arm back for a punch directly into his stomach. He was down, but only for a couple of seconds. I slid a blade out my left sleeve, stabbing it backwards while bending my knees and pulling out my katana. The sword easily slid across his neck, cutting into arteries, sinewy muscle and tendons. He was dead. I flipped around again, shoulders bunched up as I hurled myself at the man I almost stabbed with the wakizashi, initiating a sword fight with him as bright red blood splattered onto my bare arm from the man's other teammate, cut straight in half from Zabuza's Zanbatsu. There seemed to be two different teams. One consisted of two quick on their feet, taijutsu expert missing nin that worked fairly well together. They were currently being taken care of by Kakashi, who'd arrived a couple of seconds ago, relieving Zabuza of almost half his enemies. The other consisted of, obviously, 3 members, who all worked as a long-standing team, each knowing almost exactly what the others were about to do. They were fast, but with my control over wind, I could push their blade, fist or foot a couple of inches away from their target, confusing them and messing up teamwork. That was how I'd been able to get rid of one of them, and with the second teammate killed with a slice of Zabuza's sword, it was much simpler. It was now 2-on-1, Zabuza and I fighting the last of their group. This would be almost child's play. Rage fired up in the man's eyes, seeing as how we had cut down both his teammates, with a flick of a blade. He charged recklessly at me, finding me to be a smaller opponent, and I almost lazily ducked under his punch, jabbing my wakizashi at his knees while sliding my katana above him. He avoided both blades, maneuvering himself directly into Zabuza's grasp, who easily cleaved him in two. Instantaneous death. Kakashi's opponents were still standing, but warily circling him instead. Unlike the group Zabuza and I had been fighting, these two seemed to be slightly smarter and didn't charge in recklessly. Yes, maybe the previous nuke nin's cohesion as a unit made up for some of that recklessness, but that didn't mean it had saved those 3 the end. The last 2 missing nin recognized who he was. Sharingan no Kakashi, the copy ninja. They also recognized Zabuza as the demon of the mist, and one widened his eyes at me and whispered to his teammate, presumably pointing out that I was the red slash. Well, not presumably, because I had such superior hearing. It was by far the greatest of my senses, and I had had all my senses tested before. All of them except taste were accelerated, and at least 2 times as strong as a regular shinobi. Unfortunately, taste was degraded. For some strange, disgruntling reason, the missing nin were outnumbered, and all 3 of us were prone to kill every last one of our opponents. Fear showed on their faces then, and I noticed how their hands shook, not only from fatigue, but from the pure terror at facing 3 of the strongest shinobi of the elemental countries. I had a touch of respect for them as they gripped their swords in sync with a determined look appearing. They were going to fight to the death. I quickly created 10 clones, and they dashed out the door, intent on their self-employed mission. With a furious swing, one of the nuke nin came at me while the other went for Kakashi, seeing as how Zabuza's Zanbatsu was quite difficult to fight against. Zabuza, appearing a little miffed, went for my opponent, but he jumped behind me and shoved me at the sword, taking advantage of my lighter weight to throw me around. Annoyed, I stabbed backwards with the wakizashi again, and he threw me off to the side, ducking away from Zabuza's large sword. He continuously weaved around, avoiding Zabuza, and I materialized a wind blade, charging at him from behind. He assumed I was going for a punch, and only allowed room to avoid a punch, resulting in a large gash across his chest. Zabuza, apparently getting tired of him, moved to fight with Kakashi instead. I was left facing him alone. Oh well. All the more in my favor. I panted, coming at him with a slower wind blade, and he easily avoided it this time. In a flurry of taijutsu, my opponent slowly gained the upper hand, roughly pulling the wakizashi out of my hand with an expert twist of his kunai. The same kunai cut the strap holding my katana off my back. I didn't go easy on him, of course, but allowed him to get closer, and closer, and closer right as he was starting to smile victoriously, fist prepared to smash into my face. I smirked, noticing an obvious opening, open because of his carelessness. He thought he was fighting a weaker opponent, but he was wrong. I pulled out a kunai fastened to my side underneath my ANBU vest. It slid in between 2 of his ribs, and he turned pale, but stubbornly continued with his punch. I let the punch blow past my ear, and grabbed his wrist, quickly snapping it, and then reaching for his neck. With another twist, his neck was broken. Sighing, I let the body fall. Glassy eyes stared up at the ceiling, and with a bit of respect still in place for him, I bent down to close his eyes. Kakashi and Zabuza had long finished up with my opponent's partner. We stood there silently, a heavy feeling hanging in the air. However, that was immediately broken when there were shouts from the doorway, and 2 boys burst into the room, followed quietly by their female teammate. They halted, eyes wide at the scene of destruction. The scent of blood was heavy in the air, and a strange part of me craved it, until I realized that was the Kyuubi's doing again. I furiously suppressed it, and turned to Kakashi and Zabuza, the former of which was speaking. Now Gata's money needs to be split. Zabuza, did you happen upon any room you suspected to hold money or anything of that sort? A weak voice grabbed our attention. We found a couple of possible areas. Haku, Zabuza rumbled, and I could detect audible relief in his voice. He strolled almost languidly over to Haku, bending down and helping him to sit up. Haku climbed to his feet slowly, his hand pressed to his chest, no doubt because of the deep cut of the blade, but also from my volatile chakra. Haku had saved Zabuza because of that though, taking a direct hit from one of the missing nin and preventing Zabuza's death, or at least incapacitation. At least he hadn't bled to death, thanks to my instincts leading me here. Kakashi surveyed the room, taking in the damaged property. Kitsune-senpai, do you want to create 100 clones or something to clean up this building? I nodded sharply. Yes, I'll be doing that. Also, earlier, I sent a couple clones to search the building. One of them popped just recently to let me know where Gata's money seems to be located, and I have a few other locations in mind if that room is not where Gata put his money, as well. They need his identification though, so I'll first be heading to the room Sakura-san was previously in. I turned to Team 7. You three will, wait. I narrowed my eyes. Quickly I slapped my hand onto the floor, immediately realizing there were a couple of hired bandits, mercenaries, and other people Gata had hired for him left over, somehow having escaped Zabuza's and Haku's wrath and about to storm into this room right this moment. Right through that doorway that Sakura and Sasuke were still standing in front of. My clone had instinctively moved to stand in front of a wall the moment they had stepped inside the room, but Sakura and Sasuke had not. My lips curled in annoyance, I shouted duck, and hurled shuriken through the air to connect with the incoming enemies' throats, a solid thunk reverberating and a gurgling gasp following after. The ones behind them widened their eyes and fled, but were intercepted by my clones not too soon after and killed on the spot anyway. I cleared my throat, relaxed my arm, and continued. You three will also be cleaning up the building, although you can stay away from the bodies if you'd like. If you're fine with it though, Uchiha-san, you could use Katan Jutsu to burn away the bodies. Just don't start a fire. I turned back to my peers. Would you all just stay here and wait? I'll grab Gatu, and then we can get his money and split it. What if Godlike Naruto Secret ANBU Commander? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.